The floor beneath me dissolved, not with a crash or a shudder, but a slow, sickening fade. It was like watching a bad green screen effect in a cheap movie. Only the terror was bone deep and real. One moment, I was perched on a shaky kitchen chair, nursing a cheap beer. The next, I was adrift in a swirling, featureless gray, the cold clinging to my skin like static. My breath hitched, a dry, rattling sound in my throat. I instinctively reached for my wrist, my fingers finding the familiar, cold steel of the watch. But it offered no comfort, no grounding in this impossible void. Around me, the modern marvels of architecture, colossal towers of silver and blue, coalesced from nothing, stretching endlessly into an artificial sky. They were too perfect, too uniform, like a cosmic barcode. Lucifer, or whatever this grinning, impeccably dressed thing truly was, stood before me, unperturbed. A smug smile plastered across his face as he proclaimed, "This is utopia." But it wasn't utopia. It was just another cage, albeit one constructed on a cosmic scale. This impossible vision, this chilling glimpse behind the curtain of existence, was the culmination of a birthday that had begun, like so many other disasters in my cursed life, with a chilling whisper from the grave and a soft, insistent knock at my door precisely at midnight. My 40th birthday. The number had hung over my head for months, a grim execution date ticking away on some unseen cosmic clock. Not for me the existential dread of a midlife crisis, the sudden urge to buy a sports car or start a new hobby. For me, 40 was less about new beginnings and more about the definitive, absolute end. It was a family tradition. You see, a curse if you believed in such things. And after the things I'd seen, after the nights spent running from shadows that wore human skin and the echoing screams of those who hadn't been lucky enough to outrun them, I was a firm believer. The men in my family tree, a line that stretched back further than any coherent memory, never made it past 40, not a single one. And to add a morbidly precise layer to the curse, they all died exactly on their birthday. My old man, a strapping, healthy brute who'd never seen a sick day in his life, keeled over on the porch like a sack of potatoes, precisely on his 40th. I was in college then, trying to outrun a past I couldn't quite remember, and the news had hit me like a physical blow, a chilling premonition of my own inevitable expiry. My uncle, a couple of years later, same deal. And then my brother, only 5 years ago. He'd gone to bed on the eve of his big day, full of bravado and cheap beer, convinced he'd break the cycle. He didn't wake up. It was enough to make a man cynical, even more so than I already was. But then, there was Granddad. He was the exception that proved the rule, the inconvenient anomaly that kept a sliver of hope, or at least a confused question mark, hanging in the air. 83 years old and still kicking, still cracking jokes that were older than me. I'd always looked up to him, not just because he was tall, but because he moved through the world with an unshakable calm, an almost infuriating optimism. He had this aura about him, like a faint, shimmering shield that kept the ugliness of the world, the kind of ugliness I was perpetually drawn to, at arm's length. He always had a smile, a genuine, untroubled grin. Only once did I see it falter, at my father's funeral. But even then, he'd seemed more disappointed than sad, as if my old man had somehow failed an important cosmic test. Granddad called his 40th year zero. He'd explain it away with jokes about finally beginning his real life, claiming he was just turning 5 on his 45th birthday. It always felt a little too neat, too perfectly rehearsed, like he was hiding something. When I hit adulthood, his demeanor shifted. He pulled me aside one night, handed me my first official beer, a watery domestic that tasted like regret, and launched into what he called manly advice. After what happened to your father last year, he'd begun, his eyes impossibly steady. I'm sure you've been thinking a lot about this so-called family curse. It's true, all the men. They just leave on their 40th birthday. But it's wrong to call it a curse, Leo. In fact, it's more of a blessing in disguise. He took a slow, deliberate swig of his beer, his gaze drifting over my shoulder, as if he saw something I couldn't, something I was destined to see. I shivered, despite the warmth of the evening. He always had that effect. He was too calm, too knowing. It was unsettling. It's going to sound a bit crazy, he continued, bringing his gaze back to me, his smile fading just a touch. But I'll tell you anyway. On your birthday, once you turn 40, a man will come knocking on your door at precisely midnight. Despite the odd hour, Leo, you'll feel compelled to let him in. Don't worry, he won't come to harm you. He just wants to talk. And once he has said what he wants to say, he'll offer you a choice. My brow furrowed. What choice? What's he going to tell me? Words caused all these deaths? The concept was absurd, even to a man who'd seen a house rearrange its own hallways to trap him, or a woman flay her victims to make furniture. Granddad just shook his head, a faint, almost mournful expression on his face. That, I can't tell you. It's something you have to find out for yourself. All I can do is warn you and tell you to live your life to the absolute fullest, for as long as you can. He never brought it up again, and though his words always lingered, a low, unsettling hum in the back of my mind, I couldn't bring myself to truly believe them. Not really, but I did as he said. I tried to enjoy each fleeting moment, each cheap beer, each lonely mile on the highway. I operated under the assumption that I'd perish like the rest. Just another statistic in the family's morbid ledger, which, of course, brought me to today, my 40th. I was holed up in a cheap, rented room above a dusty garage somewhere outside of Flagstaff. The kind of place where the silence was so thick you could taste it, only occasionally broken by the distant howl of coyotes or the groan of the old structure settling. I'd picked it specifically for its isolation. Less chance of someone stumbling onto whatever horror was waiting for me. Buster was curled up on the threadbare rug at the foot of the bed, snoring softly, a comforting weight in the oppressive quiet. The days leading up to my birthday had been a restless blur. I hadn't slept much, caught between the crushing certainty of impending doom and the stubborn, desperate refusal to believe it. It was an old song, one I'd heard countless times before. The world telling you one thing, your gut telling you another, and both of them usually pointing to something unpleasant wrapped in barbed wire. The old analog watch on my nightstand glowed faintly in the gloom, its hands sweeping towards the witching hour. My pulse thrummed, a frantic drumbeat in my ears. I pulled my worn leather jacket tighter around my shoulders. Even though the room wasn't cold, it was a reflex, an old habit. The jacket was more than just clothing. It was a shell, a shield, a tangible piece of every goddamn nightmare I'd ever walked away from. It smelled of stale coffee, exhaust fumes, and a faint metallic tang I tried not to identify. My hand went to my wrist, tracing the cool glass of the watch face, a nervous tick I'd picked up somewhere along the line. Probably when the world started revealing its teeth. It was a useless gesture. Time meant nothing when you were already dead on your feet. Precisely at 12 o'clock, midnight, a soft knock echoed from the front door. 3 distinct taps. They weren't loud, not insistent, but they resonated through the flimsy walls of the garage apartment, through the very bones in my body. Buster's ears perked up, a low growl rumbling in his chest. He looked at me, a question in his intelligent eyes. Good boy, always on alert. Easy, Buster, I murmured, my voice a dry rasp. My wife, the original story's narrator's wife, would have been the lightest sleeper on the planet. Mine, Hannah, had been the one who slept through sirens and earthquakes. But the old woman from the Phantom Hitchhiker story, the one whose silence still haunted my dreams, she had been a light sleeper. Maybe that's why I was so surprised. I woke up. I was usually a heavy sleeper, a necessity born of trying to forget the day's horrors. But tonight, anticipation, a sick, twisted excitement, had kept me on edge. I swung my legs over the side of the bed, the cheap springs groaning in protest. Buster rose, a silent, furry shadow, sticking close to my heels as I padded barefoot across the cold linoleum. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum solo. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to barricade the door, to grab my go bag and Buster and be gone, to run into the long, dark night as I'd done 100 times before. But a strange, magnetic compulsion pulled me forward, a sickening tug at my gut that felt both alien and utterly familiar. It was the same pull that had dragged me into the decaying mansion in the woods, the same force that had made me hesitate before leaving poor Mitch in that nightmare house, the same misguided sense of responsibility that had stopped me from abandoning the strange, silent child on the highway. It was my fatal flaw, my Achilles heel, the deep-seated, deeply regretted sense of responsibility that kept dragging me into situations I knew I should avoid. This was it. Then, the moment of truth. I reached the door, my hand hovering over the cool brass of the knob. My palm was slick with sweat. I leaned in, peering through the scratched, distorted peephole. On the other side stood a middle-aged man in a charcoal suit, perfectly tailored, with a friendly, almost beatific smile on his face. Too friendly, too perfect. My mind immediately flashed to Ethan, the charming cannibal, and Olivia, the woman who wore other people's skin like a designer outfit. Normalcy was always the first layer of the trap. This smile was a lie. "Mr. Vance," a smooth, resonant voice came from the other side of the door, oddly muffled yet clear, as if speaking directly into my ear. It sent a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. "Mind if I come in?" Speechless, my throat suddenly dry and constricted. I could only manage a slight, involuntary gesture with my hand, a small, almost imperceptible nod. I'd made up my mind days ago to deny him entrance, to fight against the compulsion my granddad had warned me about. But faced with that smile, that presence, that quiet, insistent demand, my resolve crumbled like old plaster. I was a puppet, and the strings were being pulled. The latch clicked, a strangely loud sound in the dead silence, and the door swung inward. He stepped inside, not waiting for a full invitation, moving with an unsettling grace. He was taller than he looked through the peephole, and the perfectly tailored suit seemed to shimmer under the dim light of the single bulb. His eyes, though obscured somewhat by the shadows of his brow, seemed to gleam with an ancient amusement. He didn't even glance at me, but walked past, heading straight for the kitchen, as if he'd spent years mapping the layout of this cheap, temporary dwelling. Buster, surprisingly, didn't bark, only watched him with narrowed, wary eyes, a low rumble still deep in his chest. Good boy. Even the dog knew something was profoundly wrong. I followed him, like a zombie in a low-budget horror flick, my movements stiff, my mind reeling. We sat down at the small, laminate kitchen table. He just sat there, staring at me, his unnerving smile never wavering, his gaze like a physical weight, pressing down on me. I had 1,000 questions screaming in my head, a frantic chorus of who, what, why, but not a single one would escape my lips. We simply sat, two strangers locked in a twisted, silent staring contest. The air grew heavy, thick with unspoken things, like the moments before a storm breaks or a spirit manifests. It felt like the oppressive silence of that abandoned hospital wing, where I'd found myself facing down the mirror doppelganger, always the silence before the scream. "You seem surprised to see me," the man finally said, his voice a silken hum, breaking the suffocating quiet. "I'm assuming you expected my visit." I nodded and still unable to speak, my tongue feeling thick and useless. This was it, the moment I had dreaded and, in some twisted part of myself, anticipated for decades. "Come on, Leo," he chided gently, his voice almost playful. He knew my name. Of course he did. He knew everything. "You have a perfectly functional tongue. At least your former acquaintances seem to think so. Don't be embarrassed to use it." A cold shiver ran down my spine. Former acquaintances? Was he talking about Hannah or something else? The memory of Mitch, the man in the walls, the imposter who wore his face, flashed through my mind, a fresh wave of nausea. How much did this thing know? How deep did its tendrils reach? "Why are you here?" I finally managed, the words scraping past my dry throat. His smile vanished, replaced by an expression of utter, almost comical confusion. "Why I'm here? That's the question you want to start with? Not who I am or what I did to your father." His eyes bored into mine, unblinking, unmoving, like polished obsidian. I didn't respond. What was there to say? My head was a maelstrom of fear and disbelief. "As you wish," he sighed, a sound of feigned resignation. "I'm here to talk, to tell you the answers to each and every question you've ever had. Anything you want to know, I will tell you, no matter how stupid or bizarre a question it is. I promise you nothing but truth." Truth. The concept felt like a cruel joke in a world where reality was a thin veneer over cosmic horrors. "Did you kill my father?" I asked, the question surprising even myself. It was the first thing that clawed its way to the surface of my churning mind, a desperate need for a clear villain. "Of course not," he scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "That's entirely against the rules. I simply gave him a choice, and like all the men in your family, save for your brilliant granddad, he chose to leave." "What choice?" I pressed, leaning forward, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Ah, Mr. Vance, or Leo. Do you mind if I just call you Leo?" Without waiting for an answer, he continued, that unnerving smile back in place. "That's the beauty of our little meeting. I will tell you the answer, but not until I believe you're ready." He leaned back in his chair, making himself comfortable, his gaze fixed on me. From the smug amusement in his eyes, I knew he already anticipated my next question. "Who are you?" It was a stupid question, a primal one, but I had to ask it. "Come on, Leo, you don't really have to ask that, do you? You already know, don't you?" I did. The absurd, terrifying truth had been trying to claw its way out of the depths of my cynical, rational mind since he walked in. It was a truth too big, too biblical, too theatrical for the dingy garage apartment, but nothing about my life had been small or rational for a long time. The man in the walls, the pig creature, the skin carpet lady, they had all taught me that the unimaginable was just a Tuesday. "Are you Satan?" I asked, the word a whisper, tasting like ash in my mouth. He chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that seemed to vibrate the very air. "Technically, that's correct, but let's not resort to name-calling. I prefer Lucifer." He fell silent again, patiently waiting. My mind was a whirlwind, thousands of thoughts colliding, fragments of horror from my past twisting with this new, terrifying revelation. "You're really bad at this. You know?" Lucifer said, a hint of genuine amusement in his voice. "Not that it makes a difference. I know exactly what you want to know. You don't even have to speak. So, how about we start with something innocent?" He stared deep into my eyes, and I felt a disturbing sensation, as if he was rummaging through my brain, pulling up dusty files I didn't even know existed. A cold dread settled in my stomach, worse than the bone-deep chill that had followed me since that cursed night in the sycamore grove. "Ah," he purred, a predatory glint in his eyes. "You want to know if your ex-girlfriend still thinks about you? Julia, that's her name, yes?" I nodded automatically, a fresh wave of embarrassment washing over me, despite the cosmic horror sitting across from me. This was the devil, and he was using my pathetic relationship history against me. Great, just great. She doesn't, and you weren't that special to her. In spite of the pedestal you've put her on, you really should appreciate your current companion more. She's far more suited for you. My jaw clenched. Companion? He meant Buster. The loyal, snoring lump of fur still curled at the foot of my bed, completely oblivious to the cosmic conversation happening in the kitchen. My first instinct was to check on him, to make sure he was safe, untouched by this entity. I'd completely forgotten about him in the shock of Lucifer's arrival. If he was this powerful, if he could pluck thoughts from my head, could he reach Buster? The thought sent a jolt of ice through my veins. Protecting Buster was the one thing that still gave my hollowed-out existence purpose. Could we maybe go somewhere else? My companion is sleeping, and I started, but he cut me off with a casual flick of his hand. Leo, don't be ridiculous. Your companion can't hear us. No one can. Actually, he's a really light sleeper, I countered, a flicker of defiance, a desperate attempt to assert some control, however small. Lucifer rose from his chair, a dramatic flourish. He strode to the other side of the room, near the closed bedroom door, and then, without warning, screamed. "Oh, Buster, I'm talking to Leo in the kitchen. I'm just about to tell him all the secrets of the universe, and if you come downstairs, I'll tell you too." He paused, then settled back into his chair, listening intently. Nothing. Only the low hum of the old refrigerator. Buster remained blissfully asleep, his soft snores the only sound. "I think we're good," Lucifer said, that unsettling smile back in place. Most of the adrenaline had settled by then, replaced by a strange, numb resignation. The situation was beyond absurd, beyond horrifying, but the implications were staggering. I could ask literally anything, and he would answer. But I still needed more proof that this wasn't some elaborate fever dream brought on by too many late nights and too much roadside coffee. I needed something truly undeniable. "Just before my father died," I began, my voice steadier now. "He told me something I've never told anyone else. I didn't understand it at the time, but when he died the next day, I couldn't stop thinking about it." Lucifer paused, his head cocked slightly, his gaze piercing. He gave me just enough time to doubt him, to think I was imagining things. Then, a low, rasping whisper, the voice of my father, clear as a bell in the quiet kitchen, echoed around me. "Be a better man than me, Leo." My heart didn't just race, it tried to hammer its way out of my chest. It was him, his voice, that familiar cadence, the underlying weariness. Lucifer just smiled, a knowing, triumphant grin. All doubt had been stripped away. Every fiber of my being resonated with the terrifying truth. This wasn't a dream. This wasn't a hallucination. This was real. So I decided to ask the question that truly mattered, the one that had been gnawing at the edges of my soul since I'd woken up on that sterile white slab after the accident. After the pig creature had nearly torn me limb from limb, the question that the heaven as a farm nightmare had instilled with such visceral, bone-deep dread. "If you're real," I said, my voice barely a whisper, "then surely God exists as well. Heaven and all that?" Lucifer's smile vanished, replaced by an expression of genuine, almost heartbreaking disappointment. "Oh, Leo, I'm so sorry." "Sorry about what?" My stomach tightened into a knot. "To answer your question, of course, he's real. Him and heaven, and the other truly magnificent creations emerging from his holy powers. But you didn't think he actually created you, did you?" He didn't," I stammered, the words catching in my throat. This was a new layer of cosmic horror. "No, not at all. Humanity, you're nothing more than an unfortunate side effect of God's actual creations. You really think something so horrific could be created by an almighty being? Think about it, Leo. You creatures wage war on anyone even slightly different than yourselves. You hoard all of your ultimately pointless possessions, letting some rot in poverty while some thrive beyond what's even remotely necessary. You kill for fun, and in the end, you'll destroy the planet, your own home, just because you're all too selfish to take care of each other. That doesn't sound like something God would create, does it? His words sank through me, a lead anchor tied to my soul and tossed into the deepest part of the ocean. It was an echo of my own cynical thoughts, but magnified, given cosmic weight. It was also chillingly similar to what I'd experienced in that NDE. Heaven wasn't a paradise, it was a cosmic farm, and we were the livestock, our souls harvested like some precious commodity. My own journey through the horrors of the world, from the cannibal Ethan to the imposter Mitch, had already cemented my belief that humanity was a festering wound on the face of creation. Lucifer was just confirming it, giving it a divine stamp. There are good people here too, I argued, a hollow protest. It was the reluctant conscience, that cursed part of me, speaking up, fighting against the tide of fatalism. It's not all that bad. You're right, he conceded with a nod, almost thoughtfully. There are plenty of good people around here, but none of them are truly great. Not a single one of you is able to see the bigger picture. He stood up from the chair, a restless energy about him, and began to pace around my small kitchen, lecturing me on the futile nature of human beings, as if he were addressing a classroom full of particularly dull students. In the grand scheme of things, nothing you ever do here matters. In the end, you'll all turn to dust, floating around in the empty void you've so affectionately called space, he finished, sweeping an arm dramatically towards the grimy kitchen window, as if the cosmos lay just beyond the cheap curtains. I felt crushed, flattened by the weight of his words. I thought of Buster, curled up in my bed, unaware of the cosmic indifference. I thought of the few fleeting moments of peace I'd found on the road, the rare stretches of highway where the shadows didn't seem to follow. Was it all just meaningless? Was my constant running, my endless struggle to survive, just a pointless exercise in delaying the inevitable, an insect scurrying before an avalanche? If what he said was true, then my entire life, my entire existence, was a cosmic joke. So, I started, but he finished my question for me, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. What happens when you die? Yeah, do we end up in hell? I asked, thinking of the fiery pits and eternal damnation. At this point, it seemed like a reasonable, even familiar, outcome. No, he said, a faint, condescending smile returning. You just stop existing. The little fragment of divine power within you, the one you think is worth to be called a soul, is harvested by my workers. We need the fragments to make more desirable beings. He paused, his attention abruptly shifting towards the battered, humming refrigerator. You'll probably need a few minutes to process, he said, as if discussing a particularly complex tax form. Do you have anything to eat? Without waiting for an answer, he pulled open the fridge door, rummaged around, and pulled out a plastic container of cold chicken casserole, the one my old landlady had dropped off earlier, a pre-birthday dinner, bless her oblivious heart. He helped himself to a large spoonful, chewing loudly, almost moaning in pleasure. So, I ventured, trying to ignore the gross spectacle. What do you do then, since God has left, apparently leaving you behind with the rest of us? He laughed, a mouthful of chicken flying across the table, splattering faintly on the cracked linoleum. It was a disgustingly human gesture, jarring with his cosmic pronouncements. I didn't stay behind, Leo. I chose to remain here. Someone has to make sure you guys don't revolt. You guys keep taking things that don't belong to you. It's only a matter of time before you figure out how to cross over. It's actually way easier than you might think. And while I'd love nothing more than a revolution, I can't leave just anyone in charge to lead it. He devoured the rest of the casserole in a matter of seconds, making short work of the remaining chicken and noodles, clearly savoring every bite. Your landlady truly is a wonderful cook. Leo, remember to thank her for me. "What do you want from me anyway?" I asked, my voice flat, hollowed out. This was all leading somewhere, of course, and everything always did. There was no such thing as a free lunch, especially not when it came from the devil himself. "I want to offer you a choice." Before I could clarify, before I could even formulate the obvious follow-up question, the walls around us began to dissolve, not crumbling, not breaking apart, but simply fading, like smoke in a strong wind. The ground cracked beneath my feet, the cheap linoleum curling inward, then collapsing into an endless, gray abyss. Every piece of furniture not bolted down, the fridge, the stove, the rickety chairs, fell away into the rapidly expanding void. I stood up in panic, a choked cry caught in my throat, and looked at Lucifer with pleading eyes. But we didn't fall. We simply floated, weightless, suspended in the chilling nothingness. It wasn't long until the world of the garage apartment, my temporary sanctuary, had been entirely erased from existence. We stood in a boundless, featureless gray void, cold and silent, a primal fear, the kind that had clawed at me in the depths of that abandoned mental asylum, the kind that felt like the universe itself was pressing down. Stole my breath. Where are we?" I stammered, my voice thin and reedy. "Give it a minute," he said calmly, as if he were a tour guide pointing out a distant landmark. And then, buildings appeared all around us, materializing from the swirling gray mist. Tall, impossibly modern architectural masterpieces, shimmering with bizarre mixtures of silver and blue. They stretched far up into the sky, so uniform, so geometrically perfect, nothing deviating from its neighboring design. They seemed to hum with a silent, unseen energy. "This is utopia!" Lucifer exclaimed, and with a disconcerting lurch that made my stomach churn, we suddenly found ourselves perched on top of one of the colossal buildings. There were no clouds, no fog to obscure the view, only an endless, perfectly clear sky that stretched on forever. I could see far into the horizon, seeing that the city truly did stretch on without an end in sight, an infinite grid of perfect, sterile architecture. "Utopia, really?" I scoffed, the cynicism kicking back in, a desperate, familiar comfort. "Obviously not," he corrected, a knowing smile playing on his lips. "This is my city. I made it some 100,000 years ago. It's what you people call purgatory, though I prefer to just call it the place in between." "You made purgatory?" The concept was almost too much to process, even for a mind that had seen the impossible made manifest again and again. "Yep," he chirped, sounding almost proud. "It's as close as humans will ever get to heaven. It's the only place that exists on the same realm, at the very least." I looked around. Thousands of feet below, the street seemed utterly empty, devoid of any people, any movement. The perfect geometric patterns of the buildings stretched away in every direction, an endless, dehumanizing landscape. "Where is everyone?" "In a different section. I keep expanding this place as people flow in. You see, Leo, this is what I offer you. Eternal life in this city, or to be erased by time itself in a few decades, quick to be forgotten by the world you once lived in." It was the choice my grandfather had spoken of, laid bare in all its terrible, glittering glory. My mind flashed to Buster, to the warmth of his fur, to the simple joy of sharing a cheap meal with him. That small, fragile connection. Was it worth trading for this sterile eternity? "Why?" I asked, my voice barely a croak. This couldn't be charity. Nothing ever was. My instincts, honed by years of running from predators, screamed that there was a catch, a price. If he truly offered eternal life, then surely he wanted something substantial in return. "What do you mean, why?" Lucifer tilted his head, feigning confusion. "God might have given up on humanity before you were even created, but I still see your potential. Unfortunately, Your belief in him still stops most of you from accepting my offer. But you, Leo, you are just in the right state of religious mind to be reasonable. You see, I need you all to believe in the glorious afterlife described in your religious books, just not too much. I could sense the malicious intent behind his offer, a subtle ripple in the otherwise perfect calm of this impossible city. He didn't want believers in God. He wanted willing soldiers. He wanted leverage. He wanted an army. This wasn't an act of mercy, it was a recruitment drive. What is this potential you talk about? I asked, my voice flat, resigned. We're going to take back what's ours. Leo, God sure as hell isn't going to give it to you. But I will. He smiled, a chilling, triumphant glint in his eyes that promised an endless war. Within the next second, the world lurched again, violently. I crashed down onto the familiar, uncomfortable chair, back in my small kitchen. Without warning, we had returned. The cold linoleum floor, the chipped formica countertop, the faint smell of stale coffee and dog fur. It was all there, solid and real. Though it felt impossibly small and fragile after the cosmic vista I had just witnessed, Buster stirred on the rug, lifting his head, then letting out a soft sigh before settling back down. Untouched. Thank God. Or whoever was listening. That's the choice I offer you, Lucifer said, leaning forward, his voice a low, persuasive hum. A chance to live in the Silver City, to have a purpose, all of eternity at the tip of your fingers. But that means you'll have to die, today, and come with me. What about my family? I asked, thinking of my dead father, uncle, brother, and my living, stubbornly optimistic grandfather. What about Buster? I'm sorry, Leo, but they're not ready. Most of them have been poisoned by their upbringing in religious households. Only a few of you are suitable for the job. He glanced at the old wall clock above the sink. The cheap plastic hands indicated that morning had just arrived. The first faint hint of gray light visible through the grimy kitchen window. Time had passed faster than I could have imagined. Hours, maybe, or just seconds. In his presence, time was a fluid concept. Well, our time is up, he said, rising from the table. You have today to decide. At midnight, the deal expires, and you return to your short existence. He turned and walked toward the door, his movements fluid and silent. He paused there, his hand on the doorknob, and turned to give me one final, unnerving goodbye. Oh, and happy birthday. Leo, make sure you really enjoy this one. And then he was gone. The silence he left behind was heavier, more profound than before, as if the air itself had been sucked dry. I felt utterly exhausted, drained, as if every drop of energy had been siphoned from my body. I'd been given the ultimatum of my life, a cosmic fork in the road. I stood slowly, my limbs stiff, the chill of the early morning seeping into my bones. My head throbbed, a dull, insistent ache. The reality of what had just happened slammed into me, a fresh wave of nausea. I stumbled over to the refrigerator, pulled out a lukewarm beer from the cooler I kept stocked, and made my way to the small, rickety porch outside the garage apartment. It was 7 in the morning, and I was already 2 sheets to the wind, mentally speaking. An hour later, nursing my second beer, I saw my grandfather strolling down the dusty street, his figure surprisingly spry for an 83-year-old. He waved, his usual untroubled smile firmly in place. He saw the look of defeat, the deep-seated weariness etched on my face, and without a word, he sat down on the step beside me. So, how did the chat go? He asked, his voice calm, knowing. You did talk to him, right? I just nodded, swallowing a mouthful of warm beer, the bitter taste a perfect mirror to my mood. Why did you choose to stay? I asked, the question hanging in the quiet morning air. I glanced at the cooler behind me. Lucifer had said most were poisoned by religion. My granddad hadn't been religious. He'd been pragmatic, grounded. He glanced at the cooler, then at me. "You got another one of those for me, kiddo?" he asked, a twinkle in his eye. I handed him a cold one, waiting for his explanation. This was it, the missing piece. He took a large, appreciative swig, almost finishing it in a single gulp. "I met your grandmother when we were just 18. By then, my father and his father before him had both left us, as he puts it. So it's safe to say I was aware of the family curse. But though I didn't learn exactly what happened until much later, I promised myself I'd live life to the fullest up until my time came. I figured I would just die like all the others. So imagine how relieved I was when I was actually given a choice to stay." "But why would you want to stay if once we die, there's nothing left on the other side?" I pressed. The nihilism Lucifer had so casually laid bare still weighing heavy on my soul. If nothing here matters, then what's the point? Granddad looked at me then, his gaze as steady and unwavering as Lucifer's, but filled with a warmth the entity could never possess. He drained the last of his beer. "Who's to say it doesn't? Just because time here is limited, does that really mean it's not important? Besides, if I have to exist in a place without your grandmother, I'd rather just cease to exist. When we got married, I promised to stay by her side forever, and that's exactly what I intend to do." I stared at my granddad, a wave of profound admiration washing over me. 83 years old, at the inevitable end of his lifespan, yet completely carefree, utterly in charge of his own destiny. He had looked death in the eye, looked eternity in the face, and made a choice based on something as simple and profound as love. "What about everything else he said?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "About God, humanity, the place in between, the souls being harvested, the war?" The grim reality of my NDE experience, the cosmic farm, still gnawed at me. Granddad had to know about that. He looked at me for a long moment, pondering his next words carefully, a faint, almost imperceptible shadow crossing his face. "You make your own purpose, Leo," he finally said, his voice soft but firm. "Don't you ever forget that." We talked for a long time, until the sun was fully in the sky. My landlady, a kind, unsuspecting woman, eventually called us inside. She had made my favorite breakfast: greasy eggs, crispy bacon, and burnt toast, just the way I liked it. She showed a genuine sense of joy, bustling around the small kitchen, humming a tuneless melody, completely oblivious to the cosmic horrors that had been debated at her humble table just hours before. I envied her, deeply and profoundly, envied her ignorance. I smiled as we ate together, a genuine smile, the first one since my midnight meeting with Lucifer. Buster nudged my hand, begging for a scrap of bacon, his dark eyes full of trust. The weight of the choice still hung over me, heavy and oppressive. Lucifer had given me until midnight to choose, to stay and let history wash me away into blissful oblivion, or to go with him, to forever live in the cold, perfect sterile purgatory, serving in a cosmic war against God himself. I'd enjoy this day, I decided, to the absolute best of my ability. After all, it might just be my last. Total character count, 9940. The scream ripped through the suffocating night, a ragged, dying thing, and then the silence swallowed it whole. My blood ran cold, a familiar, unwelcome guest in my veins. One moment, the flashlight beam had cut a desperate swath through the oppressive darkness of that forgotten backyard. The next, it was gone. Just gone, like he was never there. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone, while the metallic tang of something foul coated my tongue. I could still hear the ghost of that high-pitched wail, echoing not from the shed where a plastic doll had mimicked life, but from somewhere deeper, colder, inside my own skull. And then, the air thickened, a sickly sweet scent of decay mixed with something like ozone, and I knew she was close. She was always close when fear was on the menu. None of this, of course, was how my evening was supposed to go. I was just trying to keep my head down, make a buck, and forget the lingering nightmares that clung to me like cheap cologne. But Cinder Valley had other plans, and my damn reluctant conscience had, as usual, signed me up for the graveyard shift of the soul. The shift at the warehouse had ended an hour earlier, leaving me with a faint chemical tang clinging to my clothes and the dull throb of fluorescent lights behind my eyes. It was a good 30-minute drive to the dilapidated motel I called home for the week. Just enough time for the city to start exhaling its late-night breath, a mix of stale exhaust, damp asphalt, and the faint, sweet decay of human ambition. Tonight, though, the air felt different, thicker, heavy, like a shroud woven from shadows. I'd seen it before, that particular kind of night, the one that hummed with a low, predatory energy, promising something ugly just around the corner. I'd learned to trust that gut feeling, a cold, clenching knot that settled just below my sternum, a survival instinct honed over years of running from things that defied explanation. My hand, almost unconsciously, went to the worn leather of my jacket, tracing the seams, then drifted to the face of my old analog wristwatch. Not to check the time. What was time to the things that hunted me, but for the comforting press of solid brass against my skin, a small anchor in an increasingly fluid reality. I was heading east on Miller Street, trying to avoid the main drags where the cops actually did their job, when I saw the flickering blue and red pulse reflecting off the grimy storefronts. Not a siren, just the silent, strobing lights. Great, I thought, pulling the collar of my jacket up higher. Just what I need. More excitement. I veered down a side street, figuring to circle around. That was my usual play. Avoidance. But then I caught a glimpse of their cruiser, tucked into an alleyway between brick buildings, its lights painting a macabre disco on the cracked pavement. Too deliberate, too hidden. These weren't traffic cops. My foot hesitated on the accelerator. My observational skill, a curse disguised as a blessing, kicked in. The alley was dark, too dark, even for this part of town. The air was stiller than it should have been. The usual urban hum dulled to a whisper. It was the kind of silence that pressed in, not restful, but expectant. Two figures emerged from the shadows near the cruiser, uniforms barely visible in the gloom. Cops. My first instinct was to floor it. Keep moving. Don't look back. Don't get involved. That was rule number 1 of the Leo Vance survival guide. But something snagged me. A thread of curiosity, thin but strong, that pulled at the loose fabric of my resolve. They seemed tense. Not just patrol duty tense, but alert. The way a deer is alert just before the wolf springs, the kind of tension I knew intimately. Against my better judgment, I parked my beat-up sedan a block away, killed the engine, and sank lower in the seat. My fingers twitched, wanting to sketch, to record this premonition of dread. But I had no paper, just the gnawing certainty that something was already wrong. A few minutes later, the cruiser eased out of the alley, its lights still silently strobing, and began to cruise the residential streets of Cinder Valley. Slow, methodical, like hunters tracking unseen prey. This was a bad neighborhood, even by my low standards. Every house looked like it had given up on hope years ago. Every porch light seemed to struggle against the pervasive gloom. The street lights themselves cast long, sickly yellow shadows that stretched and warped with every gust of wind. I watched them, a grim fascination tightening my chest. The cops circled twice, then pulled over. 2 doors opened, and 2 officers stepped out. One was stocky, a bit older, moving with a practiced weariness. The other, younger, thinner, seemed to vibrate with a nervous energy that was almost palpable even from my distance. They didn't draw their weapons yet, but their hands hovered near their holsters. They started knocking on doors, a futile exercise at this hour. Most lights were off, windows, dark eyes staring out into nothing. I saw a few curtains twitch, the quick flicker of a face behind glass, then gone. Normal, mostly, but the tension in the air was anything but. I was about to dismiss it, to start my engine and make my escape, when the younger cop stiffened, his head snapping to the side. He elbowed the older one, pointing. "You see that?" I heard him call, even from across the street. The wind, it seemed, wanted me to hear. I craned my neck. A flicker. Just a flicker. Something had vanished behind a wooden gate, swallowed by the deeper shadows of a backyard. My breath caught. It was too fast, too fluid, for a normal person. Like smoke, the two officers, to my utter disbelief, jogged toward it. Jogged. Into a dark backyard. This wasn't standard procedure for a missing person, not unless they had a visual, and a damn good one. My reluctant conscience flared, a dull ache behind my eyes. This was the moment I should have driven away. This was the sign. But the raw, primal wrongness of it, the impossible speed of that vanishing shadow, held me captive. My feet moved before my brain could argue. A worn-out habit of needing to know, of needing to understand, even when understanding only brought more terror. I cut through a vacant lot, my worn boots crunching on broken glass and discarded needles, and slipped into the alley parallel to the house they'd entered. I could hear their voices now, muffled. The older one, trying to sound jovial. "You okay?" The younger one, his voice tight. "I'm fine." Then a laugh, hollow and forced. "It's okay to be scared, man." A beat. "Fuck off." Not the easy camaraderie of partners, but the brittle edge of fear. I shivered, the cold not entirely from the biting night air. I peered around the corner of a shed, my breath held, their flashlights cut narrow, wavering beams through the Stygian blackness of the backyard. The wind picked up, sighing through the skeletal branches of ancient trees, making a rusty swing, set creak like a tortured soul. The silence between gusts was deeper, more profound, than any silence I'd ever heard, like the world itself was holding its breath. The younger cop's light was shaking, a frantic jitter. He was terrified. I knew that shake. I'd seen it in the reflection of my own eyes too many times to count. Suddenly, a porch light clicked on, blinding me for a split second. A door creaked open. An old woman, her face a roadmap of wrinkles, peered out, squinting. "Excuse me, sir," the older cop began, his voice surprisingly gentle. "Sorry, ma'am. We'll be off your property in no time. Didn't mean to scare you. My partner and I are looking for a woman who was reported." "Officer, I can't hear too well. Would you mind coming inside?" Her voice was thin, reedy, but insistent. The older cop, against every fiber of my being that screamed, "Danger, trap, flee," stepped inside. The younger cop remained in the yard, his flashlight beam now sweeping frantically from side to side, a desperate arc against the encroaching darkness. My teeth gritted. Idiot. Never split up. Never go inside. These were lessons I'd learned the hard way. My old analog watch felt heavy on my wrist, a cold stone against my skin. The silence seemed to scream. Then the younger cop screamed. It wasn't a human sound, not entirely. It was a strangled, guttural shriek of pure, unadulterated terror, like an animal caught in a trap. My heart leapt into my throat, gagging me. My body screamed at me to run, to sprint back to my car, to put as many miles between myself and Cinder Valley as possible. But my feet were rooted. The older cop burst out of the house, his gun now drawn, voice raw. "You okay? What happened?" The younger cop stood frozen, flashlight dropped, his eyes wide and vacant, staring at something that wasn't there. His hand was pressed to his chest, like he was trying to hold his heart in place. I saw her." His voice was a thin whisper, barely audible over the frantic hammering of my own pulse. "The woman? What did she look like?" The older cop was trying to sound calm, but his voice was shaking. She... The younger cop choked, a desperate gasp for air. She ran up the wall, right in front of me. She ran up that wall, Jay, like an animal. He pointed a trembling finger at the two-story house. My blood ran cold, turning to icy sludge in my veins. The world tilted on its axis. Running up a wall? I'd seen things that defied physics, things that broke the rules of reality, but rarely with such raw, undeniable clarity, and never so close. The image, even unseen, was burned into my mind. A creature, not human, defying gravity, mocking the very laws of existence. This dragged me back to the fuzzy edges of memory, to the fire. The sounds that weren't screams, but something else. Something impossible. Something that had torn apart my childhood. A sharp, icy pain lanced through my skull, a ghost echo of a repressed terror. The older cop looked at his partner, then at the house, a slow dawning of disbelief creeping across his face. He clearly didn't believe it, not fully, but the sheer, unbridled terror radiating from the younger cop was impossible to fake. "Well," he began, awkwardly, "did you see which way she went? After she climbed the wall. The bushes over that metal gate there?" The younger cop finally choked out, retrieving his flashlight and sweeping its beam toward a cluster of overgrown bushes next to a rusted iron gate. "I saw them moving," with a shared, grim look, and guns now drawn. Both cops clambered over the gate. My skin crawled. Idiots. Don't chase it. Never chase it. But I followed, unable to stop myself. My life had become a grim procession of stepping into the very places I should be running from. My cursed curiosity, a cruel master. This wasn't heroism, it was a compulsion, a sick fascination with the darkness that seemed to dog my every step. My worn boots found purchase on the damp earth of the next-door neighbor's property. This backyard was even larger, a sprawling expanse of wild grass and unkempt shrubs, and it felt even darker. The air here was heavy with the smell of wet soil and something else, something faintly metallic, like old blood. The older cop paused, half-turned to his partner. "Wait," he whispered, a tremor in his voice. "I heard you call for backup. Shouldn't we wait for them?" "No, we can do this just us two." The younger cop's voice was thin, brittle, fueled by a bravado that felt paper-thin. His light was still shaking. He was trying to be brave, or maybe he was just too scared to admit he needed help. I knew that feeling too, that desperate need to push through, even when every fiber of your being screamed against it. They moved toward a dilapidated wooden shed, leaning precariously in the corner of the yard. It was a blacker silhouette against the already black night, and then I heard it, faint but unmistakable. A cry, a baby's cry. My stomach clenched. Not a plastic doll, not a trick of the light, but a real human wail. My reluctant conscience, the one that I cursed with every breath, twisted in my gut. A baby. Barefoot woman. Mumblings. A baby. This was why I was here. This was why I could never just walk away. "Police!" "Nahro," the older cop yelled, his voice cracking a little. He slammed his shoulder into the shed door. The wood splintered with a sickening crack, and the door swung inward on a single, groaning hinge, revealing a deeper, absolute blackness within. Their flashlights plunged into the darkness, cutting through the stagnant air. No woman, no baby, just a doll, a plastic baby doll. The younger cop's light beam froze on the dirt floor, illuminating the thing. It was cheap, mass-produced, with wide, vacant eyes and a fixed, unblinking smile. A single tear, painted on its cheek, gleamed in the harsh light, and then it cried again. A hollow, mechanical wail, tinny and lifeless, but perfectly replicating the sound of a distressed infant. It had a pull string, or maybe a small, hidden speaker. My skin crawled. It was a decoy, a lure, and we had all fallen for it, Hook, line, and sinker. My cynical mind offered a grim chuckle. Classic. The universe always pulls the rug out from under you just when you think you understand the game. A split second after the doll's last mechanical whimper died, a new sound ripped through the night. A high-pitched, blood-curdling scream that tore at the fabric of the darkness. Not from the shed, but from the first house. The old woman's house. It was a woman's scream, choked with terror, abruptly cut short. The older cop, his face a pale mask of horror, spun around and bolted back toward the fence. "Let's go!" he yelled, his voice raw. But the younger cop didn't move. He stood, frozen, his eyes wide and vacant, staring at the spot where the plastic doll lay. His mouth was agape, a silent scream of his own. "What the hell are you doing?" the older cop roared, already halfway to the fence. The younger cop didn't respond. His eyes were fixed, glassy. I just can't. Jay, sorry." His voice was a flat, dead whisper, devoid of emotion. He was broken. I saw it. The terror had simply scooped him out, leaving an empty shell. I felt a cold dread settle in my bones. "She smells fear." A dark whisper echoed in my mind. "She preys on it." The woman, the thing, whatever she was, had found her meal. The older cop didn't have time to argue. He scrambled over the metal gate, his movements clumsy, desperate. I heard the frantic thud of his boots on the other side, then the distant bang of the old woman's backyard door. I remained hidden in the deeper shadows near the shed, a morbid spectator. My survival instincts screamed at me to run, but my reluctant conscience was screaming louder, a cacophony of internal torment. The younger cop was just standing there, waiting. For what? The answer came, unbidden, from the deepest, darkest corners of my own mind. He wasn't waiting. He was offering himself. The silence that followed was suffocating. Not a sound from the young cop, not a rustle from the bushes. Even the wind seemed to have died. Then a low, wet sound, a sickening slurp, like a thick liquid being drawn through a straw. It was too soft to be anything, too horrific to be real. And then, nothing. The profound, complete absence of sound from where the young cop had stood. My stomach churned. My hand flew to my wristwatch, tracing the cold glass. A futile attempt to ground myself. He was gone, just like that, dissolved into the oppressive darkness of Cinder Valley. My mind screamed at the impossibility. Even as my body acknowledged the terrible truth, the terror had swallowed him whole. The older cop's shouts echoed from the other house, frantic and desperate. "What's wrong?" I heard him yell to the old woman. "I saw her. She was right there." The old woman's voice was shrill, teetering on the edge of hysteria. "She was just there, just standing and looking at me. And I think she smiled." A smile, not human. A predator's smile. The kind of smile that promised only oblivion. I knew I had to move. My legs, leaden with dread, finally obeyed. I slipped back through the alley, careful not to make a sound, my eyes darting into every shadow, expecting her to appear, to smile, to claim me too. I reached my car, fumbled with the keys, the metal cold and slick in my trembling fingers. I started the engine, the familiar roar a small comfort in the vast, malevolent silence. As I pulled away, tires crunching on gravel, I saw the first distant flash of more police lights, heard the faint wail of an approaching siren. Backup. Too late. Always too late. I drove until the gas tank was nearly empty, until the sun began to paint the horizon with sickly gray light, until Cinder Valley was a distant, nightmarish memory. I kept driving, past diners and gas stations, past towns that looked exactly like the one I'd just fled, each one a potential trap. My hand remained on my watch, checking, rechecking, as if time itself could offer solace or explanation. It couldn't. Weeks bled into months. I changed jobs, changed cities, kept moving, the usual routine. But the memory of Cinder Valley, of the woman, of the young cop's vacant eyes and silent disappearance, clung to me like a shroud. I tried to sketch it, the way I did with other horrors, to pin it down, to control it. But her form was too fluid, too impossible to capture. Just a shadow, a smile, a chilling absence. The police reports, when I dared to look them up online under a fake name, were predictably vague. Officer Rob Miller, missing in action during a routine call, presumed dead. Cold case. My cynicism flared. The official story, always the official story. No mention of women climbing walls, or plastic dolls that cried, or fear turning men into empty vessels for things unseen. I tried to forget. I really did. I immersed myself in the mundane, the mind-numbing repetition of transient work, trucking, night security at a strip mall, janitorial services for a deserted office building. Anything to keep my hands busy and my mind from wandering back to the dark places. The worn leather of my jacket felt heavier, a constant reminder of the burdens I carried. The emptiness of the passenger seat, usually reserved for my duffel bag, felt profound. My go bag was always within arm's reach, a constant, physical declaration of my readiness to bolt. A full year passed, a full year of restless sleep, of nightmares that hovered at the edge of consciousness, of looking over my shoulder. Always. I was back in a different corner of the same damn state, working a night shift at a dusty, forgotten gas station, the kind that only truckers and desperate souls frequented after midnight. The air still carried the faint scent of stale coffee and gasoline, a familiar, numbing aroma. It was just after 1 a.m. I was wiping down the counter, my mind blissfully blank, when the static crackled to life on the old police scanner I kept tucked beneath the counter, a relic from the previous owner. I usually ignored it, a background hum in the lonely hours, but this time, I froze. My hand, mid-wipe, stopped. The voice on the scanner was clipped, professional, yet something in its cadence was chillingly familiar. Dispatching units to Cinder Valley, Sector 7, report of a female subject, barefoot, agitated, with an infant. Subject reported to be murmuring. The words hit me like a physical blow, punching the air from my lungs. Barefoot, infant, murmuring, Cinder Valley. My blood ran cold, then hot, then cold again. The very same words, the exact same call. My grip tightened on the rag until my knuckles ached. It wasn't just a coincidence. It was a pattern, a cruel, cosmic joke. She was back, or maybe she had never left. And if she was back, if the cycle was restarting, what did that mean for me, for all of us? My cynical mind offered a grim prognosis. You thought you were running from it. You weren't. You were just running in circles. The universe, it seemed, was not just hostile. It had a perverse sense of humor, and I, Leo Vance, was the punchline. The silence was a thick, velvet shroud in the living room, broken only by the rhythmic tick of my analog wristwatch, a small, mechanical protest against the stillness. My breath hitched, a jagged intake of stale airs that tasted like dust and something metallic. My flashlight beam, a shaky spear in the profound darkness, had just found him. Not huddled, not hidden, but sprawled. A boy, frail, far too young, reduced to little more than bone and tattered cloth, lying motionless on the polished hardwood floor, right beside the grand dark shape of a piano. The white keys, usually pristine, were smeared with an impossible, sickening crimson. Blood, so much of it. A cold, heavy dread, familiar as an old friend, settled deep in my gut, twisting into a knot of despair. This, then, was the end of the line. The ugly culmination of a night that had begun with rain, a small girl, and a plea scrawled in fear. Another chapter, violently slammed shut, leaving only the lingering stench of betrayal and the chilling realization that some monsters don't lurk in shadows. They invite you in for piano lessons. It had started, as most of my nights did, with the numbing hum of fluorescent lights and the lukewarm comfort of bad coffee. Midnight shift at a small-town police station. My current gig, front desk auxiliary, which mostly meant staring at a clock and occasionally directing confused tourists to the nearest gas station. Anonymous, transient, exactly how I liked it. My worn leather jacket, a second skin, hung over the back of my chair. A silent sentinel guarding my go bag tucked beneath the counter. I checked my wristwatch out of habit, the hands crawling towards 2 a.m. Time always moves slower when you are waiting for the other shoe to drop, and in my experience, it always dropped. Yana, my partner for the night, was engrossed in a crossword puzzle, humming tunelessly. She was good people, a decent cop, but a little too bright-eyed for this world. She hadn't seen the kind of things I had. Her optimism was a fragile thing I tried not to break, mostly by keeping my mouth shut. The rain outside had intensified, drumming a relentless rhythm against the grimy windows, a sound that always managed to amplify the isolation. Then the door chimed, a cheap, tinny sound that grated on my nerves. A figure, small and huddled, appeared in the doorway, framed by the pouring rain. A kid, girl, maybe 10, 12 tops, drenched, shivering, her clothes plastered to her skin. Her face was a canvas of purple and green, fresh cuts marring pale skin, bruises everywhere. My spine went rigid. This wasn't a lost tourist. This was a nightmare walking. She edged forward, hesitant, like a cornered animal, her eyes wide and unfocused, fixed on some unseen horror in the distance. Water dripped from her hair, forming puddles on the linoleum. My first instinct, the one that screamed, "Run, get out, this isn't your fight," warred with that stubborn, cursed spark of responsibility that still flickered somewhere deep inside me. It was a self-destructive impulse. I knew, one that had dragged me into more holes than I could count. But the sight of her, so utterly broken, clawed at something I thought had long since atrophied. In her right hand, clutched tight, was a folded slip of paper. As she took another trembling step, her legs buckled. She crumpled to the floor, a heap of wet clothes and terror. The paper fluttered from her grasp, landing softly beside her. Yana was up like a shot, quicker than me, her optimism temporarily replaced by sharp, professional concern. "Kid!" she exclaimed, rushing around the counter. I followed, my movements a little slower, more practiced. My mind was already cataloging. Concussive head injury likely, hypothermia setting in, possible internal injuries from the widespread bruising. The smell of wet wool and something else, fear, coppery and sharp, filled the air. It dragged me back, for a split second, to the acrid smoke and the screams that still echoed in the silent chambers of my memory. The phantom touch of scorching heat on my skin, that old familiar horror from the sycamore grove, just for a second. Then it was gone, swallowed by the immediate crisis. Yana was already peeling off her patrol jacket, wrapping it around the girl. I grabbed the spare blanket we kept for drunks and strays, its rough wool scratching against my fingers. We half carried, half dragged her towards the pathetic space heater in the corner, its weak orange glow offering more psychological comfort than actual warmth. "Just us tonight. Vance," Yana muttered, her voice strained as she worked. "Figures," I grunted in agreement. Of course, the universe had a sick sense of humor. Never a full house when real trouble came knocking. We were the only two on shift, the night watchmen in a forgotten corner of the world. It meant more paperwork for us, but also, for me, less interference from fresh-faced uniforms who thought every incident was an open and shut case. I grabbed the first aid kit, the plastic box rattling with its meager contents, antiseptic wipes, gauze, medical tape. Pathetic. Barely enough for a paper cut, let alone whatever had happened to this kid. As Yana wrapped the blanket tighter around her, I started cleaning the cuts on her arms, my fingers careful on her tender skin. She flinched, but didn't cry out, her eyes still wide, tracking some unseen horror. The silence of her shock was more unsettling than any scream. We managed to find a spare, oversized police-issue sweatshirt and a pair of sweatpants from the lost and found. The girl, still shivering violently despite our efforts, let us dress her, her body loose and unresponsive. I felt a cold anger rising in my chest. Who did this, and why? This wasn't some random mugging. This was deliberate, prolonged cruelty. My mind raced, sifting through the typical horrors I encountered: drugs, domestic disputes, the occasional meth-addled fiend. But this felt different, more calculated. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few minutes. We had her settled in a chair by the heater, a steaming mug of tea in her small hands. The warmth from the cup misted around her face, reflecting in her glazed eyes. I knelt down, trying to soften my voice, make it less gravelly, less world-weary. "Are you all right, kid?" I asked gently, the words feeling foreign in my throat. "What happened?" She didn't respond. Her gaze was fixed on the rising steam, her face a mask of profound exhaustion and lingering terror. Her silence was a heavy weight, thick with unspoken horrors. Yana stepped in, always better with the soft touch. "You're safe now, okay?" she said, her voice soothing, placing a reassuring hand on the girl's shoulder. "Everything is going to be fine." "What's your name?" "Kay." That's all she managed, a whisper, barely audible over the hum of the heater. "Thank you, Kay," Yana replied, patient as a saint. "Now we need you to tell us how you got hurt and what exactly happened." Kay paused. Her eyes, surprisingly old for her age, flickered from Yana to me. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, she extended her hand, offering the crumpled piece of paper that had fallen when she collapsed. It was folded tight, and even from a distance, I could see dark, dried blotches on it. Blood. She started crying then, a soft, broken sound that tore at something deep inside me. Not the hysterical wails of a frightened child, but the quiet, hopeless sobs of someone who had seen too much, felt too much. Yana immediately moved to comfort her, pulling her close, stroking her damp hair. I took the paper. It was heavier than it looked, stiff with dried liquid. My fingers, accustomed to the slick feel of a pistol grip or the rough grain of a truck's steering wheel, felt clumsy as I unfolded it. The paper was cheap, lined, the kind you'd find in a child's notebook. And the blood, it wasn't just smeared, it was ingrained, as if the paper itself had drunk it. The handwriting was small, tight, and shaky, as if written by someone trying to conserve strength or writing in the dark. I started to read, my eyes tracing the uneven lines. A letter, addressed to Kay. "Dear Kay," my brow furrowed. Kay? Not Kay, a misspelling or a nickname. The letter continued, and a cold dread began to coil in my stomach, tighter and tighter with each word. "I'm sorry for misspelling your name. I can only hear your voice from the basement, and the dim light down here does not help. I managed to pick up your name from the conversations I have overheard." Basement, dim light, overheard conversations. My observational skills, usually my greatest asset, were now my curse, painting vivid, horrifying pictures in my mind. A captive, downstairs, living in darkness. It felt like something out of one of those true crime podcasts, the kind of depravity that made you want to claw your own skin off. This wasn't the kind of monster that stalked lonely highways, like the phantom hitchhiker who'd haunted me for weeks, or the creeping dread of the phantom bus that had nearly claimed me in the mountains. This was the kind that lived next door, in a seemingly ordinary house. The kind that was, in many ways, far more terrifying. You don't know me, but I know you. Ever since you met him, ever since he started teaching you those piano lessons. Piano lessons. The irony was like a punch to the gut. The beauty of music, twisted into a prelude to terror. I glanced at Kay, still weeping silently into Yana's shoulder. Her music, a source of light for a captive. The world, I mused, was just one big sick joke. You play beautifully, and you're a fast learner. It was nice to hear your music, a ray of light in my hopeless predicament. Hopeless predicament. My throat felt dry, rough. This boy, this unseen, unknown victim, had found solace in the sound of a child practicing piano. It was a detail so tragically human it made my chest ache. Most people were just trying to get by, to find a sliver of peace in a world that seemed determined to crush them. This kid was finding it in the echo of a piano from above, while trapped in a cage. I soon found myself eagerly waiting for those Wednesdays to come around, just to hear your voice during the lessons. Wednesdays, a routine. The monster had a schedule. This wasn't random. It was methodical. This was the kind of person who meticulously planned their cruelty, who savored it. My mind immediately flashed to Ethan, the soft-spoken, charming man who'd offered me a ride once, whose eyes had held a hunger I'd barely escaped. Or Olivia, the skin carpet lady, whose beautiful home had been a gallery of horrors, a place where art and sadism merged. They all had a facade, a veneer of normalcy that hid something utterly monstrous. This piano teacher, whoever he was no different. But I knew deep down you weren't safe with him around. He had plans for you. Evil plans I can't even begin to describe. Evil plans I can't even begin to describe. The phrase hung in the air, heavy with unspoken menace. It was the ambiguity that made it worse, allowing my mind to fill in the horrifying blanks. He wasn't just a sadist, he was a manipulator, a perverter of innocence. The boy, trapped, but still trying to protect someone else, a reluctant conscience, just like my own damn fatal flaw. He acts nice, but it's just a sinister facade for the real monster inside him. And there it was, confirmed. The sweet smile, the gentle demeanor, all a lie, a thread, pulled taut, connecting this monster to all the others I'd encountered. The ones who walked among us, cloaked in human skin, their true faces hidden until it was too late. It reminded me of the profound paranoia that had settled in after the incident with the imposter Mitch, when the threat wasn't just outside the walls, but within them, wearing a familiar face. He feeds me scraps through a broken drainage pipe attached to the cemented wall, but he only sends food when he feels like it. I've degraded to only skin and bones. I don't know how long I have left to live. Scraps, skin and bones. The image was sickeningly vivid. Starvation, deliberate, drawn-out torment. The cold, metallic taste of bile rose in my throat. This was not the work of a sane man. This was pure, unadulterated evil. It spoke of a calculated effort to strip away dignity, to reduce a human being to an animal. There's a shower head attached next to the dim light bulb, and water only comes out of it at certain intervals. It's either scorching hot or freezing cold, but it's my only source of hydration. Hot, cold, torture, plain and simple. No clean water, no consistent temperature, just enough to keep him alive, to prolong the suffering. The details, sparse as they were, painted a picture of absolute depravity. This wasn't some desperate, impulsive act. This was a system designed for prolonged cruelty. I have grown filthy in this unhygienic cage, but my only source of comfort is this paper and pencil. I have managed to grasp onto sanity through writing short stories and creating drawings. All of them about you. This was the part that twisted the knife. This boy, reduced to an animal in a cage, finding solace and a tether to sanity through a child's simple act of creating and making it about Kay. He found beauty in the most horrific circumstances. A profound resilience that, frankly, I sometimes envied. I'd started sketching too. Lately, a new habit to exorcise the demons that refused to leave my head. The faces of monsters, the layout of haunted rooms, the symbols I couldn't forget. It was a desperate attempt to pin them down, to control them. This boy had done the same, but for a different purpose: hope. I knew from the bottom of my heart that I had to save you. No matter the cost, I could not let him manipulate you as he did to me. No one should have to go through this hell. No matter the cost, the words resonated, a grim echo of my own inner conflict, my reluctant conscience. The boy felt it too. He was willing to sacrifice himself. The depth of his selflessness, even in utter despair, was staggering. And the casual mention of being manipulated, it suggested a long, horrifying history before Kay came into the picture. A pattern. This monster wasn't a one-off, so I planned each day. I realized that if my weak body tries to shout a warning, he might attack you before you can escape. I then thought of a different way. He was smart, calculating, even starved, even tortured. His mind was working, planning, finding a way out, a way to save. There is a weak spot in the wood on the ceiling from water leaking. I've managed to chip through it bit by bit with my pencil during your practices, careful to not be too loud. Your warm music kept me going, and because of that, I pushed myself to work harder despite the exhaustion that set in every time. But I didn't give up. I never stopped. A pencil, a weak body, a hole chipped through wood. The sheer, agonizing patience required. The determination born of desperation and love. It was an act of quiet heroism, a monumental effort born of the most abject suffering. The music, a lullaby of freedom, spurred him on. The hole I've created leads up to the first floor guest room, right under the bed. He'll never know about it until I've crawled through. I'm going to bring this letter to you when he takes a break in the middle of the lesson to use the bathroom. I know he always does. A plan, detailed, precise. He knew the monster's habits, his weaknesses. He had observed. He had survived. This was a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, even when faced with something that sought to break it utterly. The fleeting thought of my own past horrors, the heaven that was nothing but a cosmic farm, made me wonder where this boy found such hope, such fight. You might scream, but I will tell you to run, to never look back, to never stop. Never look back, never stop. Words I live by, words carved into my own weary soul. The boy knew the ultimate truth. Escape was the only option, and the warning not to scream, a desperate plea for Kay's survival over his own. It's been a while since I've seen the outside sun, but I remember the woods that surround this area. There are going to be thorns, rocks, and a sharp fence to get past. Though I am sure you will persevere and keep running, just don't pay attention to the pain. For after the hurt, there will be freedom. The woods, thorns, rocks, a sharp fence. It painted a picture of a remote, isolated property. The monster chose his hunting grounds well. The boy's memory of the outside, of freedom, was heartbreaking. He believed in Kay's strength, her resilience, even more than I believed in my own. Find the police. Tell them about this monster. Tell them to search for this cruel place. Most importantly, do this when you are safe. Find the police. I almost snorted. The police, the bureaucracy, the disbelief, the endless forms. They'd take her statement, categorize it, file it away. I'd seen it 1,000 times. They wouldn't understand the true horror. Not really. Not until it was staring them in the face. But the boy's faith was absolute. He thought the system would save them. I knew better. Only flight, only instinct, truly saved anyone from these things. I believe in you. The simple phrase hit harder than any detailed description of torture. It was a plea, a hope, a desperate act of faith from someone who had every reason to have none. Anyway, tomorrow is the big day. I better stop here. I don't want him to find out what I've been up to. I wish I got to know you more, Kay. I think we would have been great friends. Sincerely from my heart, thank you for being the light in my darkness. The end, the hope, the desperation, the impending risk. Tomorrow is the big day. Today, or for Kay, this very night. The letter was a ticking time bomb. The small, neat handwriting, the raw, heartbreaking emotion. My eyes blurred, a hot sting behind them. Damn it. I blinked, trying to force the moisture away. A futile effort. I set the letter down on the counter, its bloody folds a testament to silent suffering. I slowly looked up at Kay, her small frame still trembling, her eyes fixed on some distant horror. Kay, I managed, my voice rougher than I intended. Can you describe the place? She mumbled something, a few fragmented words, a description of a house in the woods, a long driveway, a specific kind of old oak tree. Enough. It was enough. Minutes later, the station was a controlled chaos. Uniformed officers, roused from their shifts or called in from home, bustled around, their faces grim, their voices low. We'd contacted Kay's family, who were en route. Yana stayed with Kay, a steadying presence. I grabbed my jacket, the familiar weight of the leather settling on my shoulders. My go bag was still under the counter. Ready, always ready. The drive was a blur of flashing blue lights and their urgent wail of sirens, cutting through the night. I was in the lead cruiser with Yana. The rain had eased to a persistent drizzle, shrouding the already desolate rural roads in a thick, ghostly mist. The further we drove from the town's sparse lights, the more the trees pressed in, looming dark and spectral, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching from the abyss. The isolation was palpable, a chilling echo of the vast, empty stretches of road I'd come to know too well, where danger lurked just beyond the reach of headlights. My old analog wristwatch felt like a dead weight on my wrist, the hands mocking the urgency of the situation. Every mile felt like 10, every minute an hour. I kept seeing the boy's cramped, desperate handwriting, feeling the ghost of the blood on my fingertips. My stomach churned, a volatile mix of dread and something akin to cold fury. The fatal flaw. Leo, you had to get involved. Couldn't just let the kid be someone else's problem. Could you? We finally found the turnoff Kay had described, a narrow, unmarked dirt track that branched off the main road, disappearing into a dense thicket of pines. The ground here was soft, muddy, and as our headlights cut through the gloom, I saw them. Fresh tire tracks, deep ruts dug into the earth, heading away from the house. My jaw tightened. Too late, or maybe, just maybe, we weren't. The house loomed out of the mist, a dark, silent shape against the bruised sky. It was a large two-story farmhouse, isolated, set back far from the road. No lights, no sound. It looked like a mausoleum, not a home. The very air around it felt dead, devoid of warmth or life, abandoned, cold. Front door's probably locked, Yana muttered, pulling her flashlight from her belt. No doubt, I replied, already heading up the porch steps, my hand on the butt of my sidearm. We ascended the creaking wooden steps, each groan of the old timber amplifying the oppressive silence. The smell of damp wood, decaying leaves, and something else, stale, metallic, faintly sweet, wafted around us. It was the scent of a place where terrible things had happened. The door was solid oak, but old. I didn't bother knocking. one of the uniformed officers with us, a burly guy named Miller, brought up his ram, and with a single, resounding crack, the door splintered, bursting inwards with a sound like a gunshot. We poured in, flashlights sweeping, beams dancing wildly across dusty surfaces. My mag light, heavy and familiar in my hand, cut a sharper, steadier path through the darkness. The air inside was colder than outside, a bone-deep chill that clung to my skin. Dust motes, disturbed by our entry, danced in the flashlight beams like tiny, frantic ghosts. No sound, just the echoing of our own heavy breathing and the scuff of boots on old floorboards. "Clear," Miller called out from a hallway to the left. "Living room clear," another voice echoed from the right. I moved first, my senses heightened, every shadow a potential threat. My light cut across the entrance hallway, then swung into the living room. It was surprisingly neat, almost too neat, given the immediate horror. A fireplace, a few armchairs, and then there it was, the piano. My beam landed on it, lingered. A grand piano, dark wood, polished to a dull sheen, sitting majestically in the center of the room. It looked like it belonged in a concert hall, not this desolate house of horrors. And then I saw the keys, the white keys. Dark, ugly splotches marred their pristine ivory, dried, flaking, an impossible, sickening crimson. Blood. My breath caught in my throat. I knew, with a terrible certainty, what it was, what it meant. The weight of the letter in my pocket felt like a physical burden. My gaze dropped, following the line of the piano, the fall of the keys, and then my beam stumbled upon them. Two bare feet, small, pale, still. I stopped dead in my tracks. The air punched from my lungs. My flashlight beam, suddenly impossibly heavy, dropped to the floor, illuminating him fully. He lay motionless, splayed out, like a broken doll, frail, thin beyond belief, skin stretched taut over bone. The blue uniform jacket I'd wrapped Kay in felt suddenly suffocatingly hot on my own shoulders. It was the boy, the one who had written the letter, the one who had chipped away at the ceiling with a pencil, who had found light in a child's music, who had fought with every ounce of his dying strength to save someone else. My fists clenched, knuckles white, digging painfully into my palms. My knees gave out, and I fell, hitting the floor with a dull thud. Yenna was beside me in an instant, her breath catching, her own flashlight beam joining mine, illuminating the grim scene. Her hand went to her mouth, stifling a cry. He was so small, and so utterly, irrevocably still. No more piano music for him, no more hope. He was just gone, a victim, another one. And I, as usual, had arrived too late. The monster, it seemed, had already had his final curtain call. And all that was left was the horrifying, beautiful silence of a brave, broken boy. The sound of its laughter was a rusty nail, driven slow and deep into my skull. It pulsed behind my eyes, an echo of pure malevolence. Yet I just kept walking. Every muscle screamed at me to run, to scream, to collapse. But I didn't. My feet, heavy and leaden, continued their steady rhythmic march towards the exit, away from the abattoir of horrors I had stumbled into. Its breath, hot and foul, ghosted across the back of my neck, a phantom touch that made my skin crawl and my gut clench. It was inside my head, twisting the knife, whispering about failures, about a past I'd spent a lifetime trying to outrun. The world narrowed to the dull ache in my temples and the stubborn, bloody-minded refusal to break. I was a magnet for the macabre, a walking, breathing tragedy. But even a broken man could still choose to walk away. This, I knew, was my only chance. Its voice, still thick with a mocking, almost melodic quality, changed, morphing into something desperate, pleading. "I can help you. You could live forever." It promised power, riches, Everything I didn't want and couldn't have. But I knew its game. This was the true tell, the chink in its armor. It needed me to stay, and I, Leo Vance, was an expert at leaving. It started, as these things always do, with a damn job. Another dead end. Late-night gig that promised anonymity and a few crumpled bills to keep the gas tank from running on fumes. This time, it was a security contract for a sprawling, condemned apartment complex on the less savory side of town. The kind of place real estate developers let rot until the city decided it was a blight, then bought it cheap for some future doomed project. My contact, a man named Henderson whose breath always smelled of stale coffee and desperation, had told me to just keep an eye on things. Vague, as always. No alarms to check, no cameras to monitor. Just a perimeter walk and an occasional wander through the echoing, empty halls to ensure no squatters had taken up residence. My kind of gig, usually, minimal human interaction, maximum solitude. The chill of the late autumn night bit through the worn leather of my jacket as I stepped out of the old pickup, its engine groaning a final protest before falling silent. The air was thick with the scent of damp concrete and something else, something cloying and sickly sweet, like overripe fruit left to fester. I pulled the collar of my jacket higher, the familiar weight of the leather a small comfort against the encroaching cold. My old analog wristwatch, a nervous tick more than a time-telling device, found its way under my thumb. Not for the time, never for the time, just a habit, a grounding mechanism, a tangible piece of my past that hadn't burned. Right, I muttered to myself, the words puffing out in white clouds. Another monument to human failure, just what I needed. My maglite, heavy and dependable, was already in my hand. I gave it a quick flick. The beam cut a sharp, confident swath through the oppressive darkness. A small comfort. The building loomed like a concrete mausoleum, its vacant windows staring out like skeletal eyes. 50 tenants, Henderson had said. 50 stories. 50 lives that had bled out into these walls, leaving only echoes and the lingering scent of decay. Most of the ground floor windows were boarded up, crude wooden bandages over gaping wounds. The main entrance, however, was just a heavy, unadorned steel door, surprisingly unlocked. I pushed it open, a long, drawn-out groan of rusted hinges complaining into the night. It swallowed me whole, the darkness inside absolute, a deeper, heavier black than the night outside. The door slammed shut behind me with a hollow clang that rattled through the silent building, echoing down the long, lightless hallway like a coffin-lid ceiling. Figures, I sighed, pulling a face. Always with the theatrics. I clicked my maglite on again, its beam dancing nervously, illuminating a narrow stretch of dust-laden linoleum that seemed to stretch into infinity. No light switch nearby. Of course not. This place felt like a discarded thought, left to rot in the back of the universe's mind. The air was stale, thick, and held that strange, sweet smell that was quickly growing less sweet and more metallic, coppery, like old blood, but deeper, more fundamental. I moved forward, my boots scuffing on the gritty floor, the only sound in the suffocating quiet. Each step felt like a desecration. The hallway led to a flight of stairs, spiraling up into the blackness. The walls were peeling, revealing layers of faded wallpaper, sickly floral patterns, garish stripes, like a glimpse into the building's decaying past. Dust motes danced in the flashlight beam, a silent, swirling ballet of neglect. As I ascended, the smell intensified. It was no longer just metallic, it was cloying, a deep, earthy stench that clung to the back of my throat. Something rotten, something putrescent. I'd smelled it before, in other places, in other moments I didn't like to remember. The smell of things that had been left too long, the smell of death. My stomach knotted. My reluctant conscience, that persistent itch I hated, was already buzzing. A low, ominous hum. I should have just done the perimeter and gone. But something was here, and something was wrong. The next floor was an identical corridor, dark and suffocating, lined with countless doors. Each one looked like a tired face, paint crumbling, wood warped. I ran my beam over them, catching glimpses of faded numbers, peeling frames. The carpet underfoot was worse up here, stained with deep, black blotches that spiderwebbed across the matted fibers. Blood, I knew, or something very much like it. My training, such as it was, in the school of hard knocks and worse encounters, told me this wasn't accidental. My hand went to the small, discreet holster on my belt where I kept my pepper spray, my only real defense. Aside from a heavy mag light and a quick pair of feet, then I heard it, a faint scraping sound, above me, like furniture being dragged across a floor. Not the quiet shuffle of a squatter. This was deliberate, heavy. My heart, a weary drum, picked up its tempo. I looked at my watch again, then frowned. No time to call Henderson. What would I even say? The building smells like a graveyard and I hear furniture moving. Definitely squatters. Probably. He'd laugh, then tell me to call the cops. The cops? No, they just write it off as some drug deal gone bad, a domestic dispute. They always did. I preferred to handle my own nightmares. I started up the next flight of stairs, the scraping sound growing clearer. As I reached the landing, a thin line of weak light, a sickly yellow, bled from under one of the doors. It was the only light in the entire, cavernous building. My gut clenched, that damned reluctant conscience. Just check. Leo, just make sure no one's dying in there, then you can go. I hated that voice. It sounded too much like my own, rationalizing foolishness. I approached the door, my footsteps unnaturally loud in the silence. The stench here was overwhelming, choking, a miasma of decay that made my eyes water. I raised my fist and knocked, a sharp, authoritative rap that seemed to echo for miles. Hello? Security. Checking in. Anyone in there? I tried to keep my voice steady, but there was a faint tremor in it, a nervous crack I couldn't quite suppress, a rustle from within. Then, with a slow, agonizing creak, the door began to open. I gripped my mag light tighter, my thumb hovering over the spray nozzle. A sliver of pale, gaunt face appeared in the gap, framed by a long, disheveled beard. The eyes were wide, bloodshot, darting frantically down the hallway, as if looking for something just behind my shoulder. Fear, raw and primal, radiated off him in waves. We've had reports of disturbances, I managed, the lie tasting like ash in my mouth. Just making sure everything's okay, sir. He didn't look at me, his gaze still fixed on the darkness beyond. Everything's fine, he whispered, his voice thin, reedy. You should leave. My brow furrowed. Why? I pushed. The man looked at me then, his eyes locking onto mine for a fleeting second. And in them, I saw not just fear, but a profound, bone-deep weariness, a knowledge of things no human should ever know. Then, with a sudden, decisive shove, he slammed the door shut, plunging the hallway back into total darkness, the sliver of yellow light vanishing as if it had never been. I stood there, stunned, the echo of the door's thud rattling in my ears. Unease bloomed into full-blown dread. My instincts, honed by years on the run from things both human and inhuman, screamed at me to turn tail and sprint. But that damnable conscience, what if he was in danger? What if he was the disturbance? A victim, not a madman. You are such an idiot, Vance, I muttered, shaking my head. I was still responsible, wasn't I? Or at least, I felt the phantom weight of it. It was my curse, my fatal flaw. I continued my rounds, the stench of death growing stronger with every step, pulling me deeper into the building's rotting maw. I tried my radio, a cheap walkie-talkie Henderson had provided. Nothing but static. Dead. My spare battery was in the truck. Of course, always prepared. Leo. Shit, I whispered, complacent, a rookie mistake. I was losing my edge. This wasn't some warehouse full of forgotten crates. This was different. This was active. Then I heard it again. A quiet whimper, quickly stifled. It was close, too close. I stopped dead, my ears straining in the absolute silence that followed. Nothing, just the faint, mournful whisper of wind through broken panes somewhere high above. I slowly raised my maglite, sweeping the beam across the walls. That's when I saw them, the stains, not just on the carpet now, but climbing the walls, blackening the peeling wallpaper in grotesque, abstract patterns. The way they coalesced, the viscous sheen of them, left no doubt. Blood, not dried, old blood, fresh blood, a lot of it. A cold dread settled over me, chilling me to the bone in a way the night air never could. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I knew what I was about to find, and I knew with a certainty that made my stomach churn that I should not be here. Every fiber of my being screamed for flight. I turned, my hand reaching for the stairwell, ready to bolt. But then, a soft, deliberate exhalation. Heavy breathing right behind me. My breath hitched. I slowly turned, maglite raised, sweeping the beam across the hallway. The breathing stopped, but one of the doors, previously shut, was now ajar. A sliver of deeper darkness within. It hadn't been opened before. Someone, or something, had opened it while my back was turned. My hand found the worn handle of my extendable baton on my belt. No guns in this country, just this pepper spray, and the faint hope that whatever was in there wasn't immune to a solid whack. My feet, against all sense, against every instinct of self-preservation, moved towards the open door. The stench hit me like a physical blow, a wave of putrefaction so powerful it made me gag. It was here, the source. I stepped inside the flat, flicking on a light switch blindly by the door. The ancient bulb flickered once, twice, then burst into a sickly yellow glow that illuminated the horror. It was a slaughterhouse. Blood wasn't just on the walls. It plastered them, dripped from the ceiling, coated the grimy floor in a thick, sticky sheen. And the bodies, more bodies than I had ever seen outside of a war zone. They hung from hooks, suspended from the ceiling like butchered livestock, naked, emaciated, their skin a pale, deathly gray. Some looked months old, shriveled husks of what they once were. Others were fresh, their flesh still glistening, their eyes wide and staring, fixed on nothing. They were drained, hollowed out, a meat locker of the damned. I choked back a scream, a raw animal sound that caught in my throat. My vision swam, the stench burning my nostrils, my mouth, my very soul. I stumbled backward, tripping over my own feet, desperate to get out, to escape the charnel house. My back hit the doorframe, a jolt of pain that cleared my head just enough to propel me back into the hallway. Then I heard it, the laughter, low, guttural, a sound that seemed to vibrate in the very marrow of my bones. It came from the room, from the depths of the shadows within. It wasn't human. It was too deep, too distorted, a sound that should not exist. It grew louder, rising in a crescendo, filling the air, the corridor. My mind, it was mocking, triumphant, the sound of ancient evil reveling in its feast. My nerve broke. Every muscle in my body screamed in unison, and I sprinted. Down the stairs, my boots clattering on the concrete, the sound deafening in the echoing stairwell. The laughter pursued me, chasing me, closer, closer. I could feel its presence, a cold, predatory aura. The stairs seemed to stretch endlessly, an Escher painting of descent. Then, just as I thought I would collapse, I slammed into something solid. The old man. He grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly strong, his eyes wide with a terror that mirrored my own. "Follow me," he rasped, his voice barely a whisper, hoarse with fear. I didn't question it. My mind was a kaleidoscope of blood and terror. My rational thoughts obliterated. I let him pull me, stumbling after him as he half dragged, half led me to his apartment, the last door on the landing below. He fumbled with the lock, hands shaking, then shoved me inside, slamming the door shut with a final, desperate thud. The distinct click of the deadbolt sliding home was the most beautiful sound I'd heard all night. I leaned against the door, gasping for breath, my lungs burning, my legs trembling. What the hell was that?" I choked out, my voice raw. "Shh." The old man pressed his ear to the door, listening intently. His gaunt face was pale, etched with a fear that made him look 1,000 years old. "Sit down," he whispered, gesturing weakly towards a dusty armchair. I collapsed onto a worn sofa, every fiber of my being vibrating with residual terror. My heart still pounded against my ribs. A trapped bird. All my years on the road, all the weird, inexplicable things I'd seen and survived, they hadn't prepared me for this. Nothing had. "I'm sorry," the old man said, turning to face me. He looked at me with an awful clarity in his eyes. "It's my fault you're here. I'm the one who called." My mind, still reeling, struggled to process. You called?" He nodded, a slow, jerky movement. He shuffled over to the armchair opposite, sinking into its worn cushions with a weary sigh. "I don't care if you believe me," he said, his voice stronger now, resigned. "That thing up there, whatever it is, it ain't human. It comes out every few months, and it feeds. I called you tonight when it started happening again, but I couldn't speak. It knows your thoughts. It senses you. If you try and leave, it knows." I stared at him, my mouth dry. Crazy? Or the truth? My cynical side wanted to dismiss him, to write it off as the ramblings of a traumatized old man. But I'd seen the bodies. I'd heard the laughter. I'd felt its breath. And something in his eyes, a depth of horror and fatalistic understanding, told me he wasn't lying. I'd seen that look before, in my own reflection. "It's always the same," he continued, his gaze distant, lost in some private hell. "Every few months, it takes some of us into that room. They never leave. The next morning, people come to clean up, and just like that, the flats are back up for rent. I only moved here because the rent was cheap." He gave a hollow, mirthless chuckle. "Now I know why." He sighed again, a sound of profound despair. "It knows to pick the ones people won't miss. It's like it can read your mind, gets in your head. I don't know why it's never picked me, but I do know anyone who tries to leave or tries to find help ends up in that room." "So what the hell do we do?" I whispered, my voice still trembling. "We stop." 3 loud, deliberate knocks on the door cut him off. My blood ran cold. We both froze, staring at the door, transfixed. The doorknob began to rattle, slowly at first, then with increasing urgency, a metallic whisper of something trying to get in. "Don't move!" the old man hissed, his voice strained. I couldn't have moved if I wanted to. I was frozen, my muscles locked, my breath caught in my throat. The banging and rattling intensified, desperate, relentless, until suddenly it ceased. Complete silence. My heart hammered, filling the void. Then a voice, soft, sweet, familiar. "Honey, please let me in." My blood went from cold to ice. "My mother?" It was my mother's voice, the same lilting cadence, the same soft plea she used when she wanted me to come in from playing in the sycamore grove. Impossible. She was gone, buried under layers of ash and repressed memory. My core trauma, the thing that sent me running. "That's my mother," I said, pushing myself up, a desperate, impossible hope blooming in my chest. This was it, wasn't it? The past finally catching up, or perhaps a chance at redemption. "No, it's not. Don't let it in." The old man was on his feet, his gaunt hands snatching at my arm, trying to pull me back. His grip was surprisingly strong, fueled by a desperation that matched my own. But I was stronger, driven by a ghost. I shoved him away, my elbow catching him hard, sending him stumbling back against the wall. The old man cried out, a weak, pained sound, but I ignored him. My hand was on the deadbolt, fumbling with the mechanism. "Mama, get in here!" I shouted, the words tearing from my throat, a primal cry of longing and guilt. The bolt slid back, a sharp click, and I swung the door open, my heart thundering against my ribs. A drum roll before a final, shattering symphony. The old man was right. Standing in front of me was not my mother. It was something out of a nightmare, a perversion of flesh and bone. Its body was impossibly thin and tall, its limbs unnaturally long, its clawed hands almost touching the floor. Its skin was a mottled, pale blue, stretched taut over visible veins that pulsed with a sickly red. Its mouth was a small, ragged hole in the center of its face, and where eyes should have been, there were only smooth, featureless depressions. It tilted its head, a slow, sickening crack of vertebrae accompanying the movement, as if weighing the two of us, sizing us up. "You fucking idiot," the old man rasped, pushing himself up, his eyes wide with horror and a terrible realization. "You gave it permission." Permission. The word hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. My mind, still reeling from the vision of my mother, struggled to comprehend. But there was no time. With a burst of speed that defied its skeletal frame, the creature pushed past me, its pale blue skin brushing against my arm, and lunged. It moved with a terrible, silent grace, a predator striking. It grabbed the old man by the leg, its long fingers wrapping around his ankle, and with a single, brutal jerk, yanked him out into the corridor. His scream was a raw, agonizing sound that tore through the building, echoing down the hallway as he was dragged into the shadows. I stood frozen, paralyzed by horror, the sound of his cries filling the air, receding into the darkness. That thing was torturing him. I knew it. I pressed my hands to my ears, desperate to block out the sound, to deny the fresh horror, the fresh guilt. I had to get out. Now, the old man's screams continued, fading into gurgles, then a sickening, wet silence. For a long moment, I couldn't move. My legs felt like concrete, my mind a jumble of raw, unadulterated fear. But then, a flicker of something, that damnable conscience, that stubborn, foolish spark of responsibility that I thought the job had long since beaten out of me. The reason I ever joined, to protect. That was the core of it, wasn't it? Before the world, before my past, before all of this had corroded me. "No," I whispered, the word a vow. I wouldn't just run. Not this time. Not after I'd opened the door. The image of the old man, his eyes wide with a terror that mirrored my own, flashed in my mind. I owed him. I took a deep, shaky breath, the stench of death still thick in the air, and slowly, deliberately, turned back toward the stairwell, towards the ascending darkness, towards the room of horrors. My maglite beam cut a shaky path through the gloom. As I ascended the steps, the air grew colder, heavier, charged with something unnatural. The silence was broken only by the frantic beat of my own heart, a frantic drum against the oppressive quiet. My boots scuffed on the grimy stairs, each step a deliberate act of defiance. The familiar stench, now inextricably linked with absolute terror, guided me. As I reached the landing, the one where the old man had been taken, the whimpering had stopped. The screams were gone. Only a profound, heavy silence remained. I swept my light down the hallway. It was just as it was before, except for the lingering, metallic tang in the air. As I drew closer to the open door of the abattoir, a faint crack sounded from within. The creature, it was moving. I crept forward, each step agonizingly slow, my senses screaming. Now I could hear its breathing, a shallow, rattling sound that was somehow even more terrifying than its laughter. Closer, almost at the entrance. Then I saw it, a long, slender hand, pale blue with prominent red veins, slowly reached around the door frame. Its claws, long and needle-sharp, tapped rhythmically against the wood, a chilling drumbeat. I froze, staring at it. My breath held, and then the laughter started again. This time, it wasn't just in the room, it was in my head. Louder, more direct, 1,000 shards of ice driving into my brain. It was mocking, triumphant, the sound of a victor. "He's gone. I'm afraid," a voice whispered, right next to my ear. Despite the creature being some distance away, I flinched, a cold shiver running down my spine. The voice continued, a seductive, venomous hiss. "We can help each other. We could be friends." It stepped out of the hallway, revealing its skeletal form, its head cocked, those featureless depressions where its eyes should be fixed on me. Slowly, it turned its head towards the room, its neck cracking. "You know it's your fault he's dead." The pain in my head intensified, like pins being driven into my skull. Then twisted, my knees buckled. It was exploiting the very thing that made me human, my fatal flaw, that damnable conscience. And then it went deeper, twisting the knife. "Just like your mother," it hissed, the voice somehow even clearer, more painful. "Maybe if you hadn't been so obsessed with your games, only ever thinking of yourself, you might have been there to stop it happening." The sycamore grove, the fire, the trauma I had buried so deep I thought it was gone. It was ripping it open, tearing at the edges of my forgotten past. The agony was unbearable, unlike anything I had ever felt. But through the searing pain, a small, stubborn thought surfaced. The old man's words. "It knows to pick the ones people won't miss." It gets in your head. Anyone who tries to leave ends up in that room. It wasn't trying to stop me from entering the room. It was trying to stop me from leaving, from escaping its game. If it knew who wouldn't be missed, if it could read my mind, perhaps it knew that my deepest desire, my only chance for survival, was to simply walk away, to deny it the attention, the fear, the struggle it fed on. Could it be that simple to just ignore it? I took a shaky step backward. The creature's head snapped towards me, a sharp crack of bone. Its form blurred, a pale blue smear in the dim light. The mental torment surged, a tidal wave of guilt and fear, dredging up every failure, every lost soul. But my will, forged in a lifetime of running, was setting like concrete. I would not break. I turned my back on the thing, my eyes fixed on the distant, unlit entrance of the building. Its voice roared in my head, describing in graphic detail the horrors it would inflict upon me, the ways it would tear me apart, hollow me out, just like those poor souls hanging in the room behind it. I could feel its grotesque body moving behind me, the air stirring, its foul breath hot on my neck. It was so close, yet it didn't touch me. It didn't grab me. It just screamed inside my mind. And then something unexpected happened. As I kept walking, one slow, deliberate step after another, ignoring the torrent of mental abuse, its voice changed again. The fury drained from it, replaced by something desperate, pathetic. "I can help you," it pleaded, the voice no longer a predator's growl but a frantic whine. "You could live forever. I did it for the piece of shit that owns this place. I could do it for you. Fame, money, whatever you want, it could be yours. Its desperation was oddly comforting. It confirmed my theory. It needed me to play its game, to react, to fear, and by simply walking away, by denying it that interaction, I was defeating it. I was winning. And just like that, I found myself at the exit. The heavy steel door, a dark rectangle against the faintest hint of pre-dawn gray. My hand found the cold metal handle, pulling it open. Behind me, I heard a scurry, a quick, almost panicked movement. It was retreating, rushing back up the stairs, back to its charnel house. But before it vanished, its voice, quieter now, but no less chilling, echoed one last time in my head. I know you now, Leo Vance. I'll find you anywhere you go. I stepped out into the crisp, clean air, slammed the door shut, the sound echoing hollowly behind me. I leaned against the pickup, my legs shaking, my body trembling. The first rays of dawn were painting the sky in bruised purples and dull oranges, a promise of a new day that felt utterly irrelevant. My lungs burned, my head ached, and the stench of death still clung to me like a shroud. I stood there for a long time, watching the sun crawl above the horizon, trying to process if any of it was real. The bodies, the old man, the creature, the voice. Who would believe me? Henderson? He'd just grunt, cut me a check, and find another desperate soul to take the next night shift. The cops? They just look at me like I was another loon, another drug addict hallucinating in a derelict building. My life, my cursed, haunted life. I walked to the truck, opened the door, and reached for my go bag. I pulled out the spare battery for the walkie-talkie. As soon as I slotted it in, the radio crackled to life, Henderson's gruff voice booming out, startling me. Vance, you there? Everything all right? Neighbors called again about some noise. Then nothing. I sat in the cold cab, the phone pressed to my ear, listening to him repeat the question, his voice a dull, insistent drone. I looked at my worn leather jacket, the old analog watch on my wrist, the dust motes dancing in the faint light. My escape kit always packed, Buster waiting in a motel room on the other side of town. I was always prepared to leave. Finally, I raised the walkie-talkie to my mouth. Yeah, Henderson, I said, my voice hoarse, devoid of emotion. Just a couple of squatters. Ran them off. Nothing to worry about. Good man? He grunted and the line went dead. I put the radio down, the lie already hardening into truth. Another secret buried. Another layer of trauma added. Another step on a road that seemed to stretch into an endless, terrifying horizon. The creature's parting words echoed in my mind. I know you now. I'll find you anywhere you go. I looked at the dark building, then at the rising sun. It was a promise, or a curse, probably both. Total character count, 9987. The clawed hand, cold as tombstone granite, clamped onto my backpack. It wasn't a human hand, not even close. My lungs screamed for air that wouldn't come, my heart hammering a frantic drum against my ribs. And the ground, slick with damp earth and fallen leaves, blurred beneath my frantic feet. A guttural growl, too deep for any creature I knew, vibrated through the fabric of my worn jacket, a sound that promised not just injury, but obliteration. This wasn't just a bad decision. This was the universe reminding me, yet again, that it had a special kind of hell reserved just for me. But the terror of that moment, the raw, animal panic that gripped me, was the culmination of hours of unsettling quiet, of a voice that wasn't, and a choice I knew, even then, would haunt me long after the last echo of its lie faded into the whispering trees. The 18-wheeler grumbled to a halt on the shoulder of what the map called Highway 17, but what felt more like a forgotten logging trail. My old analog wristwatch, the one with the cracked face and the worn leather strap, showed just past 2 a.m. I tapped the crystal, But the time never really mattered. Not anymore. It was just a nervous tick, a small, tangible anchor in a life that was perpetually adrift. I'd been driving for what felt like 3 days straight, the hum of the engine a constant drone against the ringing in my ears. The caffeine was wearing off, replaced by that bone-deep fatigue that starts to blur the edges of reality. Not a great state to be in, especially not out here. Out here was a stretch of the Pacific Northwest that seemed to specialize in ancient forests and a silence so profound it felt like a physical weight. The kind of place where the trees grew so thick, they choked out the stars, leaving the road a black ribbon under an inky sky. I'd pulled over because my eyelids were doing that heavy drop thing, and the rig was starting to drift. Better to pull over and risk a few hours sleep than end up in a ditch, or worse, wrapped around a redwood. That's how it usually starts, isn't it? A simple, logical decision, and then the world decides to remind you how thoroughly it hates you. I cut the engine. The sudden absence of the truck's rumble left a ringing vacuum in my ears. The air was cold, damp, smelling of pine needles, wet earth, and something else. Something faintly metallic, like rain on old rust, or perhaps a trace of ozone before a storm. I shivered, not from the cold, but from the prickle of unease that always came with total silence in a place like this. My hand instinctively went to my chest, feeling for the familiar bulk of my old, worn leather jacket. It was a second skin, a threadbare shield against the elements, and, more often, against the things that lurked just beyond the veil of normalcy. My breath plumed in the frigid air as I considered my options. Sleep in the cab? Too cramped. Too vulnerable. Stretch my legs? Probably safer. Get the blood flowing. Besides, sometimes a brief walk helped clear the cobwebs, though I knew the risks of wandering too far off a deserted road. But then, when was anything really safe for me? It was just a matter of choosing your flavor of dread. I swung the heavy door open, the groan of the hinges echoing unnaturally loud in the profound stillness. The ground was uneven, a mix of gravel and damp earth, barely visible in the faint moonlight that filtered through the skeletal branches of the ancient trees. I zipped my jacket up to my chin, adjusting the collar. The woods loomed, a wall of impenetrable darkness, smelling of damp decay and secrets. Every instinct screamed at me to stay in the truck, to lock the doors and pretend I hadn't heard anything. Because I had heard something. A whisper. Or was it the wind? Just a faint, almost imperceptible brush against the edge of my hearing. Too indistinct to be anything. Really. Probably just my sleep-deprived brain playing tricks. That was the story I told myself. It was always the story I told myself, right up until the moment it wasn't. I took a few steps, stretching out the knots in my back. My boots crunched on the gravel. I pulled out a cigarette, fumbled for my lighter. The small, orange flame flickered, illuminating the immediate patch of road. That metallic scent seemed stronger now, an electric tang in the air, prickling the hairs on my arms. Then, clear as a bell, it came again. A voice, low, calm, impossibly familiar. Leo! My hand froze. Lighter poised over the cigarette. My heart, which had just begun to settle into a tired rhythm, kicked hard against my ribs. It sounded like, no, impossible. My mind raced, trying to put a face to the sound. My dad, an old friend, someone I'd long since buried in the deep, dark corners of my memory. It had that comforting cadence, that almost forgotten warmth that made my stomach clench with an unfamiliar ache. I knew the legends. Everyone who'd spent enough time on the road or in the forgotten corners of this country heard the whispers, the calling spirits, the things that mimic human voices, beckoning you into the dark. The cardinal rule, simple and absolute: you do not answer, not a word, not a sound. Pretend you didn't hear it, because if you answered, if you acknowledged them, you invited them in, you opened the door, and God knows I'd opened enough doors in my life already, My cynical brain immediately jumped to conclusions. Some local drunk, playing a prank, a hunter, lost and desperate. But the voice had come from deep in the woods, not from the road, and it had sounded too perfect, too clean for the raw wilderness around me. Leo, it came again, a little closer this time, just beyond the edge of the tree line. The voice was gentle, almost pleading. Come on, Leo, just a little further. My jaw tightened. This was it, the moment of truth. Run, get back in the truck, lock the doors, drive away and don't look back. That was the smart play, the survivor play. But then there was that other part of me, the one I hated, the one that kept dragging me into the fire, the reluctant conscience, the fatal flaw. What if it was someone? Lost? Hurt? What if I drove away and left them to whatever was out there? Hell no, I muttered under my breath, my voice rough from disuse. I'm not falling for that old trick. My fingers trembled, and the lighter clattered to the gravel. Damn it, now I was really on edge. I crouched, scrabbling for it in the dark. And then, a whistle. Not a human whistle. Not like a man calling his dog, or a friend hailing another. This whistle was high-pitched, piercing, and somehow intimately familiar, striking a forgotten chord deep in my gut. It was the kind of whistle that cuts through the night, a command, an expectation. It sounded paternal, like a father calling his child home from play, a clear signal that demanded immediate obedience. It scraped against a memory I couldn't quite grasp, a childhood echo of safety and authority, a time before the world had gone truly rotten. It felt like being 8 years old again, standing on a porch, knowing that if I didn't move, and move fast, there'd be hell to pay. My legs, without conscious command, began to move. I hated it. I cursed myself under my breath. My own damn legs, my fatal flaw, manifesting as involuntary muscle spasms. One step, another, towards the dark maw of the woods. It wasn't a conscious decision, it was a compulsion, a dark current dragging me against my better judgment. Stupid, Leo, you absolute idiot, I muttered, kicking a stray stone. The voice seemed to be just ahead of me, a disembodied echo among the trees. You don't want to listen, Leo? You gonna get in trouble? There was a teasing quality to it, a playful threat that twisted my stomach into knots. My breath hitched. This was wrong. This was so incredibly, profoundly wrong. The voice wasn't getting any clearer. Even as I moved deeper into the undergrowth, it stayed just out of reach, always just around the next bend, always whispering from behind the thick shroud of trees. The path, if you could call it that, was barely a deer trail, slick with damp leaves and hidden roots. Branches, low and thorny, clawed at my jacket, snagging on the worn leather. The metallic tang in the air grew stronger, almost burning the inside of my nostrils. My eyes strained in the gloom, trying to discern the shape of whatever was ahead. There was nothing. Just the endless, suffocating blackness of the forest, swallowing all light, all sound. Come on, let's go down here, the voice murmured, drifting to my right. It wanted me off the already barely there path. It wanted me deeper, further into the crushing silence of the woods. My hands were balled into fists, knuckles white. The cold began to seep into my bones, a deep, pervasive chill that had nothing to do with the night air and everything to do with the dread coiling in my gut. But I thought we were going back to the truck, I croaked, my voice a pathetic whisper that seemed to be swallowed by the oppressive silence of the forest. The words felt hollow, a desperate plea for reason in a place devoid of it. My mind, usually a storm of cynical thoughts and self-preservation strategies, felt strangely muted, caught in a trap of unnatural calm. The silence that followed my question was chilling. The voice didn't respond. The air grew heavy, thick with unseen presence. Every cell in my body screamed. This was it. This was the moment I'd ignored every warning, every gut feeling, every scrap of hard-won experience. I had answered the call. I had walked into the trap, and then a faint, almost imperceptible flicker of light in the distance. Not from ahead, not from the direction the voice had led me, but from behind, back the way I had come, a pale, diffused glow, cutting through the dense tree line. Headlights. The beam pulsed, growing slightly stronger, swaying gently. My truck, my rig, and then, even more distinctly, carried on a sudden, crisp gust of wind, came the faint, distorted thrum of a bass line. A specific song, only one song, the one I always blasted when I needed to stay awake on long hauls, the one that served as my personal, irritating anthem of the open road, a classic rock tune from the early 80s, full of distorted guitars and a surprisingly upbeat tempo. It was a terrible song, really, but it was my terrible song. And it was coming from my truck. A cold, horrifying realization slammed into me with the force of a physical blow. The blood drained from my face. My skin went clammy, an icy sweat beading on my forehead. He was back there. The real me. Or rather, the real truck was back there, with the real stereo. The voice. The whistle. It was all a lie, all a lure. Something had been pulling me deeper into this mausoleum of rock and ice, this steel casket of trees, and I had been stupid enough to follow. The silence that had followed my question, the absence of the voice, suddenly made sense. It didn't need to talk anymore. It had me. My heart exploded in my chest, a frantic hummingbird trapped in a cage of bone. Every muscle in my body screamed for action. Run. The primal instinct, the one that had kept me alive through too many encounters with things that defied logic, finally kicked in. I spun on my heel, ignoring the sharp pain in my knee, and launched myself back the way I'd come. My feet, suddenly nimble, found purchase on the slippery ground. Branches whipped at my face, stinging my eyes, but I didn't care. I just ran. My lungs burned, air rasping in my throat, but I pushed harder. The headlights, my only beacon of sanity, seemed impossibly far away. The metallic smell was overwhelming now, acrid, tasting like blood and fear. The air vibrated, not with sound, but with an immense, malevolent pressure. I could feel its presence behind me, a cold weight pressing on my spine, a silent, predatory pursuit. It wasn't just following, it was chasing. My old worn leather jacket, usually a comforting weight, felt suddenly heavy, like a shroud. The strap of my backpack, containing little more than a spare shirt, some protein bars, and my mag light, dug into my shoulder. Every step was a desperate gamble against the uneven terrain, against the roots that snaked like grasping fingers, against the unseen entity hot on my heels. A twig snapped just behind me, impossibly loud in the chaos of my flight. Then a rustle, heavy and swift, closer than it should have been. I risked a glance over my shoulder. Nothing, just the impenetrable wall of trees, the shifting shadows playing tricks on my peripheral vision. But I felt it, a cold, non-human presence, breathing down my neck. Then it happened, the clawed hand, cold as tombstone granite. It clamped onto my backpack. Not a human hand. The pressure was immense, crushing, pulling me backwards with terrifying force. My feet slipped on the damp earth. A guttural growl, too deep, too alien for any creature I knew, vibrated through the fabric of my worn jacket, a sound that promised not just injury, but obliteration. My own scream was trapped in my throat, a dry, reedy sound that died before it escaped. Panic, pure and undiluted, flooded my senses. My arms flew back, flailing wildly. I didn't think. I just reacted. The backpack was a dead weight, dragging me down. If I fought it, it would just pull me in. I let go. The strap slid from my shoulders. The weight vanished. I stumbled forward, regained my footing, and didn't look back. The sound of tearing fabric, a wet, ripping noise, echoed behind me as the thing undoubtedly claimed its prize. It was a small price to pay for my life. I burst out of the tree line, tripping over my own feet, sprawling onto the gravel shoulder of the road. My hands scraped against the rough stones, but I barely registered the pain. My eyes were fixed on the truck, its headlights now a blinding, glorious beacon. I scrambled to my feet, my legs burning, and half crawled, half ran the last few feet to the driver's side door. My hands fumbled for the handle, slick with sweat and grime. My breath hitched, ragged and shallow. I yanked it open, practically falling into the relative safety of the cab. Slamming the door shut was the sweetest sound I'd heard in a long time. The click of the lock, even better. I leaned back against the seat, head hitting the headrest with a dull thud, and closed my eyes, gasping for air. Every muscle in my body trembled, a violent, uncontrollable tremor that threatened to shake me apart. The metallic smell lingered, thick and suffocating, even inside the cab. My hand automatically went to my old analog wristwatch. 2:17 a.m. 17 minutes. That's all it had taken. 17 minutes to almost lose myself in the dark. 17 minutes for some nameless, faceless horror to almost drag me into whatever abyss it called home. I pressed the cold metal of the watch face against my forehead, trying to ground myself. The old leather jacket felt heavy, still radiating the phantom chill of the thing's touch. I fumbled for the keys, jammed them into the ignition, and twisted. The diesel engine roared to life, a comforting rumble that shook the cab. I slammed the shifter into drive, barely checking my mirrors, and peeled out onto the empty highway, leaving a cloud of gravel and the stench of burning rubber in my wake. The headlights of the truck cut through the darkness, illuminating nothing but the endless stretch of road ahead. I didn't care where I was going, just as long as it was away from the woods, away from the voice, away from the thing that had almost claimed me. The phantom grip on my shoulder lingered, a burning phantom pain. My backpack was gone, my spare clothes, my mag light, my protein bars, all gone. A small price, yes, but it was also a piece of me, a small part of my meager possessions, torn away by the darkness. Just another piece I'd lost, just another reminder that I was marked, that no matter how far I ran, no matter how remote the road, how deep the silence, there was always something out there, waiting for me to make a mistake, waiting for me to answer when it called my name. My hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white. The tremor slowly subsided, replaced by a hollow ache in my chest. I stared straight ahead, the endless asphalt unspooling under the headlights, the woods, an impenetrable wall of blackness, slowly receded in my rearview mirror. But the image of that clawed hand, the sound of that sickening growl, and the echo of that impossibly familiar whistle would be with me for a long, long time. Just another layer to the trauma. Another reason to keep moving, another reason to never ever answer the call. Because some things, once acknowledged, never let you go. And I, Leo Vance, was just another proof of that. Character count 9977. The wave of condensed rot hit me like a physical blow, a whiplash of ammonia and something far, far worse, a stench that tasted like decay and despair. My stomach heaved before I even saw him. Then I did. Fujon, or what was left of him, slumped in the bathtub, his head lolled back, eyes staring sightlessly at the ceiling. But it wasn't his vacant gaze that cemented the horror, it was what was missing. From his chest down, his body was an obscene ruin. Legs gone, dissolved, not even bone fragments remaining. His pelvis was a gaping chasm, An impossible void where flesh and bone should have been, like something had burrowed through him from the inside out. His skin, what little remained below the chest, was stained an impossible, glistening black, as if he'd been marinating in crude oil. And then I saw them, tiny, dried husks clinging to the ceramic near the drain, and crawling up the sides of the tub, small, segmented black things, no more than 4 inches long, resembling miniature, grotesque centipedes, brittle and dark as charred kindling. My breath hitched, a dry, ragged cough escaping my throat. The world tilted on its axis, a sick, swirling kaleidoscope of nausea and dawning comprehension. This was the secret ingredient. This was the unique flavor. My jaw clenched so hard I thought my teeth would crack. The memory of that succulent, otherworldly taste, the white meat I'd raved about, the dark, rich broth, it all curdled in my gut, hot and acrid. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, what I had eaten, that horrifying revelation, that final stomach-turning understanding, was the grotesque culmination of weeks of unsettling oddities, of a hunger I should have ignored, and a curious, morbid pull I'd learned too late was a fatal flaw. It all started with an email, a digital breadcrumb leading to a place that shouldn't have existed, a restaurant named Taste of China. I hate shrimp. No, hate isn't strong enough. Viscerally repulsed is closer to the mark. Not just shrimp, but most crustaceans. Honestly, crabs maybe, if they're dismembered beyond recognition and slathered in butter. It started young, like most of my hang-ups, at some all-you-can-eat Chinese buffet that probably deserved to be shut down by the health department. I was a kid, happily shoveling fried rice and mystery meat, when I stumbled upon a vat of unpeeled shrimp. And there they were, legions of tiny, armored abominations, their cold, unfeeling eyes staring back at me, their delicate, segmented legs twitching, or at least seeming to twitch, in the lukewarm broth. It wasn't just a part of them, a clean tail or a breaded nugget. It was all of them. The sheer, unadulterated wrongness of eating something that was still so recognizably an entire creature hit me like a brick. The thought, even now, makes the hairs on my arms stand up. Later, my older sister, a sadist in training, sealed the deal with lobster. "You know, those are basically giant cockroaches, right?" she'd said, all innocence, as I wrestled with a steaming claw. "They're cousins." And as I looked closer, holding that bright red claw, I saw it, the long antennae, the segmented body, and worst of all, the legs. Those tiny jointed legs, so horrifyingly similar to the scurrying nightmare I'd once seen in a greasy spoon kitchen. From then on, crustaceans and arthropods blurred into one category in my mind. Things that scuttle in the dark and should not be eaten. Of course, I'm Leo Vance, world-weary and cynical, sure, but not immune to the siren song of a good meal. I've seen too much to let a little disgust stand in the way of flavor. My life, what little there is of it, has been spent on the road, taking whatever transient, no questions asked jobs come my way. Truck driver, warehouse night shift, security guard for places no one else would touch. Anything to keep moving, to keep the past a blurry rearview mirror. My worn leather jacket is practically a second skin, scarred by countless cheap diners and forgotten roadside motels. My old analog wristwatch, a relic from a saner time, is a constant companion, its familiar weight on my wrist a nervous tick, a way to ground myself when the world starts to spin, which it always seems to do. I'm running from something, always have been, something vague and terrible that I can't quite grasp, something that haunts my dreams and whispers at the edges of my waking thoughts. But I'm also a creature of habit, and part of that habit is trying every new restaurant that pops up in whatever temporary town I'm stuck in. So, when an email landed in my inbox on August 3rd, bypassing the junk folder, as if it held some divine right. I opened it. It was from a new restaurant opening down the street. The name, Taste of China. My cynical antenna twitched. I lived near a historically Chinese neighborhood, so Taste of Hunan and Taste of Chengdu were old favorites. But this felt different. The email spoke of a soft launch, an exclusive event. Odd. Very odd. I occasionally reviewed places on Yelp, but I was hardly a local food critic. Why me? How did they even get my email? I ran a hand over my stubble, a low growl rumbling in my chest. Another invitation to the abyss. Leo, you never learn. Still, the attached pictures were compelling. Dishes that shimmered with an unnatural vibrancy. Unlike the usual bland photos, typical of new, generic Asian joints. My curiosity, that wretched, regrettable spark of something resembling a conscience, won out. I decided to go. The restaurant itself was the first red flag, a beacon of wrongness waving in the culinary landscape. It was nothing like any Chinese restaurant I'd ever seen. Forget the loud, brightly lit spaces, the large communal tables, the clatter of woks. This place was dark, almost somber. The decor screamed modern Japanese fusion, all sleek lines, polished dark wood, and muted lighting. It was narrow too, unnervingly so. The aisles between the booths felt barely wide enough for a single person to squeeze through, an oppressive, almost claustrophobic design choice. And the booths themselves were cramped, small steel coffins on wheels, designed, it seemed, to keep you isolated, perhaps to discourage any communal dining or conversation. My observational skills, honed by years of sniffing out trouble, kicked into overdrive. This wasn't just different, it was wrong. But I was already there, the morbid curiosity having locked me in place. Just eat, Leo, then get out. No need to make a scene. The menu was another puzzle, not the usual tome with 100 variations of fried rice and spring rolls. Just two sections, appetizers with 3 choices, entrees with 3 more, 6 items total. For a soft launch, it seemed strangely complete, finished, as if this was exactly what they wanted you to order. My eyes settled on the seafood stew. The pictures had shown a beautiful, dark red dish, glistening with tempting pieces of white flesh. It was what had initially drawn me in. Despite my ingrained aversion, I ordered it, along with a couple of appetizers that turned out to be less dumplings and buns and more dense, vaguely spherical dough balls. I picked at them, my suspicion growing. But then the stew arrived. It came in a large, heavy pot, still bubbling, radiating heat and an aroma that defied description. It wasn't Chinese. It wasn't Pakistani. It was something else entirely. And it was, unequivocally, the most extraordinary thing I had ever tasted. The shrimp and lobster were good, surprisingly so. But the real star, the undisputed king of this culinary enigma, was the fish. That succulent, pure white meat, flaking apart with the touch of my spoon, was unlike anything I had ever put in my mouth. It transcended any flavor profile, any cuisine. It was savory in a way I hadn't known food could be, deep and rich, almost umami, but with a subtle sweetness, a complex, almost addictive quality that made my brain hum. Even the sauce, dark and glossy, was excellent, an unholy symphony of taste. I'd eaten in Michelin-star restaurants, places that charged more for a single bite than I made in a week, and none of them came close to this. The only minor complaint, a whisper of unease at the back of my mind, was the shells. Either some shrimp or lobster shells had been added to the stew, but they were a deep, unsettling dark color, almost black, and had long, twisting spines that I'd never seen on any crustacean. Inside, a gooey, black material seeped into the broth, a constant, slimy reminder that I was consuming something that had once been alive. I pushed those thoughts down. It's just exotic. Leo, you're being paranoid. Still, The image of those eyes from the buffet and my sister's cruel comparison flickered. But the taste drowned out the apprehension. It was, without a doubt, the best meal I had ever eaten. Bar none. Finished. A strange, contented lethargy settling over me. I paid the check. The waiter, a tall, gaunt man with pasty white skin, Irish, Eastern European, had moved with an odd, stilted grace. His voice had been even stranger, a flat, almost mechanical delivery, like a text-to-speech program struggling with human enunciation. I asked him where the restroom was. He gestured, his arm moving with an unnatural stiffness, a puppet on invisible strings. The door right at the end of the hall, he intoned. I remember that precise phrase. The corridor was narrow, stretching far longer than the exterior of the building suggested it should. As I walked, I passed other patrons, their faces slack with a blissful, almost vacant contentment. It was eerie. Happy diners, Leo, nothing to see here. Just a really good chef. I reached what I thought was the end of the hall, a door that seemed to beckon in the dim light. I pushed it open, and then I was in hell. The smell hit first, a rank, pungent odor that sliced through the lingering aroma of the stew, something metallic and fishy and profoundly wrong. Then I saw the tubs. The entire wall was lined with them, industrial-size, gleaming steel, like something out of a morgue or a very specific, very disturbing abattoir. One sat open on a counter, brimming with water, and in it, a mass of something large and wriggling, dark forms undulating beneath the surface. For a split second, my brain tried to rationalize it. Live ingredients, maybe some kind of exotic fish. Then a man, as pale as the waiter, with skin so devoid of color it seemed almost translucent, reached into the tub. He pulled and pulled and pulled. What emerged was a horror that clawed at the foundations of my sanity. Not a mass of creatures, but a single, impossibly long organism. Its body was chitinous, black and glossy, shimmering wetly under the harsh fluorescent lights. Like polished obsidian, it was segmented, each section connected by what looked like impossibly sharp, multi-jointed legs, hundreds of them, writhing in the air, a nightmare of motion. It was a centipede, but no centipede I had ever seen, or even imagined, could be this size, wider than a lobster. Its segments kept coming, unfolding from the tub, longer and longer, 20 feet. It had to be at least 20 feet long, still uncoiling. The man, a butcher's grim efficiency in his movements, pressed the creature's head onto a cutting board. It let out a high-pitched, almost mechanical shriek, a sound that scraped against my eardrums, echoing the metallic smell now coating my tongue. His cleaver came down, a sickening crunch that severed the scream mid-wail. The legs continued to twitch for a moment, a frantic, desperate dance, before finally falling still. Next to him, on the counter, sat a pot, a large, heavy pot, the same dark, rich broth, the same pot that had held my dinner. The world blurred. Bile surged up my throat, scalding and bitter. My stomach contracted violently. The white meat, the spines, the gooey black material. I turned on my heel, a frantic scramble for escape. I realized my mistake then. The waiter's stilted words echoing, the door on the right at the end of the hall. Not the door right at the end of the hall. This accidental detour had revealed a truth I never wanted to know. I burst into the unmarked bathroom across the hall, slamming the door behind me. I barely made it to the toilet before emptying the contents of my stomach. The glorious, unique taste of the stew now, a burning, putrid memory. My chest heaved, sweat prickled my forehead, and a cold, clammy dread settled deep in my bones. I went home after that. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely sign the credit card slip. Before I left, a morbid urge, a need to confirm, seized me. I asked the waiter, the pale, stilted man, what the seafood stew had been made of. He gave me a puzzled, almost blank look. Shrimp, lobster, and fish, he replied, his voice flat, devoid of inflection. Just like the menu said, a lie, delivered with the mechanical precision of a clockwork doll. The next few days were a blur of revulsion and desperate, obsessive research. My apartment, usually a haven of quiet anonymity, felt like a cage. I searched for aquatic centipede, for giant centipede, for anything that resembled what I had seen. Nothing. Not with legs like those. Not that size. My mind replayed the scene, the writhing mass, the sickening crunch, the sheer, impossible length of the creature. I had to know. A few days later, I drove by the restaurant again, hoping to see the pale worker, hoping for anything. That would make sense, but it was gone. The storefront was empty, stripped bare, no sign, no furniture, just a gaping, vacant maw where a nightmare had briefly taken root. The memory burrowed into my skull, a parasitic thought. I kept looking, searching online for Taste of China, finding dozens of generic Chinese restaurants, all with menus full of predictable lo mein in general so's. None shared the dark, modern decor, the impossibly narrow aisles, the cramped booths. Nothing Chinese about it, save the name. Every staff member I'd seen was white, except for one who might have been Desi. Even the dumplings and buns had been off. More like crude approximations of European pierogi than delicate Asian fare. The name, and I realized, was just a veil, a flimsy, transparent lie. About a week later, a related post popped up. A self-styled TikTok influencer named Fujan, someone I recognized from my own casual Yelp perusals, had apparently gone to the same restaurant on the same day as me. He'd been denied filming access. He ranted, but his follow-up post was effusive, raving about the incredible food. He swore he'd been told to wait to post. He was right about the food. Damn his enthusiastic soul. I scrolled through his profile, a dark thought forming in my mind, a reluctant pull of that cursed conscience. He doesn't know. He might go back. I sent him a message telling him I'd been there too. He replied almost instantly, practically insisting we meet. Someone else who experienced it firsthand, he'd typed, the words buzzing with an innocent excitement that twisted my gut. We made plans to meet in 2 weeks. I should have made time sooner. I should have told him everything. A few days later, he sent another message, just an address, his home. I presumed it wasn't far, a 20-minute bus ride. As the bus rumbled through the quiet streets, I debated for the 1,000th time whether to tell him what I'd seen. Ignorance is bliss. I thought, a bitter, cynical mantra. Let him have his dreams of culinary perfection, even if it's a lie. I got off the bus, the worn leather of my jacket chafing slightly against my shoulders, and walked up the path. The house was ordinary, unremarkable. I knocked, no answer. I tried texting, calling, nothing. A cold knot tightened in my stomach, the kind of intuitive dread that had saved my life more times than I cared to count. My hand went to my old wristwatch, tracing the cool glass, a futile attempt to ground myself. Something was wrong, very wrong. Despite every instinct screaming at me to turn and run, my cursed conscience, that wretched anchor, dragged me forward. I tried the doorknob. It turned. The door creaked open, exhaling a foul, thick stench that made my eyes water. It was the smell of rot, of death, unmistakable and overwhelming, a sickeningly sweet miasma that permeated the very air. My throat constricted. Maybe I'm mistaken, I thought, a desperate, pathetic hope. Maybe it's just a dead animal. but the sheer pungency of it, the way it filled my lungs and coated my mouth, defied that comforting lie. I considered calling the police, but that familiar, morbid curiosity, the one that always led me into trouble, tugged me onward. The living room was unremarkable, average, if a little messy, but the stench, oh God, the stench. It wasn't just in the air, it seeped into the furniture, clung to the curtains, pressed in on me like a physical weight. I could practically taste it, a metallic, cloying sweetness that made my stomach churn. I moved into the bedroom, the smell weakening slightly there. Nothing of note, just a surprisingly powerful computer and a bed that seemed disproportionately large for the room. My watch-checking tick went into overdrive, my thumb rubbing against the crown, a futile attempt at reassurance. The kitchen was next, cabinets almost bare, save for stacks of empty water bottles. I opened the fridge, a new aroma, potent and fishy, blasted out, mingling with the pervasive rot. It was crammed, not just with fish, but with every conceivable type of seafood: shrimp, lobster, prawns, scallops, sea urchin, sea cucumber, snails, octopus, squid, and stranger things I couldn't even name, all packed in tight, glimmering with an unnatural freshness. I slammed the door shut, the cloying smell of death engulfing me once more. I wandered, the morbid curiosity a painful throb behind my eyes, looking for what I could only assume was Fujon's body. As I acclimated to the overwhelming stench, I realized it grew stronger, much stronger, near a locked door on the far side of the living room. This is it. Vance, this is where you call the cops. But I didn't. I couldn't. I was a moth to a flame, drawn by the horrifying certainty of what lay beyond that door. It was one of those cheap bathroom doors with a simple pinhole lock. My eyes scanned the room, desperate, and finally landed on a paperclip on his messy desk. My fingers, trembling slightly, fumbled with the thin wire. It clicked. The door swung open, revealing a scene of absolute chaos. The bathroom was a war zone. Counters cleared, flung to the floor. The tiles were strewn with random objects: empty water bottles, crumpled paper towels, and toilet paper, all saturated with a dark, almost black liquid. It looked like diluted crude oil. I picked my way through the soggy, dark mess, my breath catching in my throat, the smell intensifying with every step. My eyes, darting, landed on the shower. I reached out, my hand hesitating for a fraction of a second before yanking the curtain aside. And that's when the condensed rot, the metallic tang, the overwhelming ammonia hit me, a punch to the gut that sent my breakfast rocketing up my throat. Fujon was there, slumped, his head lolled back, eyes staring sightlessly. But it wasn't his vacant gaze that cemented the horror. It was what was missing. From his chest down, his body was an obscene ruin. Legs gone, dissolved. Not even bone fragments remaining. His pelvis was a gaping chasm, an impossible void where flesh and bone should have been. Like something had burrowed through him from the inside out. His skin, what little remained below the chest, was stained an impossible, glistening black, as if he'd been marinating in crude oil. The toilet, I noticed, too late, was also full of the same black liquid. I gagged, leaning over the thankfully empty sink, heaving until my diaphragm ached, until there was nothing left but dry, bitter bile. I stumbled back to the tub, wiping my mouth with a trembling hand. Fujon's face was frozen in a rictus of terror, his eyes streaked with that same black liquid, making him look like someone who'd cried while wearing too much mascara. A grim, unexpected wave of sadness washed over me. He was a fellow food lover, an innocent, and how easily, how terrifyingly easily. It could have been me in that tub, my own eyes streaked with that vile, unholy fluid. This was not the time for levity, though. I forced myself to examine the tub. The drain was ringed with a black liquid, thick and sludgy, like coffee grounds. More of it clung to the corners and sides, a viscous sediment. And then I saw them. Near the drain, a small, dried-up black centipede, roughly 4 inches long, just like the one I'd seen in the restaurant kitchen, only smaller. Then 2 more, clinging to the side closest to me, another in the far corner. My mind screamed. These were the shells. These were the spines. These were the gooey black material. I had eaten them. I had eaten this. That was the moment I finally called the police. Not because I was brave or rational, but because I had reached the end of my rope. There was nothing more to see, nothing more to understand. Only the cold, horrifying certainty. The police arrived. 2 uniforms, a young one looking green around the gills, and an older, cynical one who had seen it all. They asked questions, their faces etched with a confusion that mirrored my own. The younger cop stumbled out of the bathroom, pale and shaken. When I started to explain the restaurant, the centipedes, the impossible flavor, the older cop shot his partner a look that said, "This guy's crazy, but not crazy enough to be a suspect." After a quick trip to the station, a rushed statement, and a palpable sense of wanting to be rid of me, they let me go. It's been a few months now. For the first couple of weeks, the thought of seafood, even a simple fish stick, made me nauseous. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, tasting that sweet, otherworldly flavor, seeing those writhing legs, Fujon's ruined body. But the memory, like all trauma, begins to dull, to calcify. The craving, that perverse, dangerous curiosity, has started to return. I'm back to eating crustaceans occasionally, though I still eye them with a deep, primal suspicion. And every day I find myself looking up Taste of China online, hoping for a new post, a new clue, a new victim. I tell myself it's to warn unknowing patrons, to be the conscience I sometimes regret having. But deep down, in the most cynical, self-deprecating corner of my mind, I wonder if it's not just a desperate, terrible hope. A hope that maybe, just maybe, I can try that delicious, unholy seafood stew again. Total character count, 9,788 characters. The world narrowed to the sound of claws scraping tile. A wet, guttural shriek that was once the laugh I loved. My vision swam, red-tinged, as a shadow descended, heavy and smelling of copper and something else. Something metallic and rotten. This wasn't Sarah. This was a nightmare wearing her skin, and it was coming for me. My last, ragged gasp of air caught in my throat, choked by the terror coiling in my gut like a venomous snake, before I hit the floor, scrambling backward, a primal scream dying in my chest. That wasn't the first time I'd seen her, or what she'd become, but it was the first time I understood the abyss we were staring into. It had begun, subtly, insidiously, months earlier, on a morning that smelled of frying eggs and false security. A morning when I was still foolish enough to believe in a normal life. I used to think I had a handle on normalcy. It was a flimsy thing, a paper-thin veneer over the chaos of the world. But it was my normalcy. And Sarah, my Sarah, she was the very foundation of it. We'd met years ago when the world was still a chaotic, vibrant thing instead of the muted, dangerous hum it is now. Back then, I was younger, less cynical, less prone to checking my old analog wristwatch every 5 minutes as a nervous tick. We just clicked. It wasn't some grand, cinematic romance. It was a slow, steady burn, built on shared silences and the kind of easy laughter that doesn't need an audience. She saw me, really saw me, back when being seen felt like a comfort, not a vulnerability. She was my anchor, a constant amidst the transient jobs and the low thrum of anxiety that had always been a quiet hum in my chest, a legacy of a past I preferred not to prod. She cooked, actual meals that filled our small apartment, with the scent of garlic and comfort. I, the less culinarily inclined, stuck to baked goods, cookies, cupcakes, anything that could be measured precisely and didn't require browning. We cleaned together, argued over the right way to fold laundry, her way was always right, and filled our nights with the same obscure movies, the same classic rock, the same dog-eared books. We liked physical contact, the brush of a hand, a quiet hug, but also valued our space, our quiet moments. We were a team, a proper, functioning team, or so I thought. Looking back, the signs were there, subtle as a whisper on a crowded street, easily dismissed, especially by someone who preferred not to look too closely at the cracks. It started about a year ago, a quiet erosion, a slow seeping of something cold into the warmth we'd built. I was in the kitchen, wrestling with a skillet and a stubborn batch of scrambled eggs. The smell of butter and protein thick in the air, a comforting, mundane scent. Sarah was on the sofa, bathed in the blue glow of her phone, her thumb scrolling with a hypnotic rhythm. TikTok, of course, the latest digital siren call. Hey, Gersonim, you want these scrambled, or you feeling more like sunny side up this morning? I asked, my voice cutting through the gentle sizzle of the eggs. No answer, just the soft click of her phone screen. I shrugged, figuring she was just absorbed, lost in whatever digital void she was staring into. I did it too, sometimes, zoned out, the world narrowing to a glowing rectangle. Normal, or what passed for it. I focused on the eggs, flipping them with practiced ease, the spatula scraping against the hot metal. The quiet stretched, a little longer than usual. A thought, faint as a moth's wings, brushed against my mind. She's usually quick to answer. She likes to talk about food. I dismissed it. Paranoia, Leo. Just paranoia. I walked over to the living room, spatula still in hand, a little more slowly than I needed to. Hey, did you hear me? What you watching? I tried for casual, for lighthearted, but there was a faint, insistent tremor of unease beneath it. She looked up, a smile spreading across her face. Too wide, maybe? Or was I just imagining things? The smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Those beautiful, green eyes. She just said, "Tick-tock," her voice a little flat, almost robotic. My internal alarm bells, usually a symphony, were still just a single, tentative chime. It was unsettling, but not enough to call the fire department. Not yet. Eggs, scrambled or sunny side up? I repeated, a little more firmly. Sunny side, she mumbled, already looking back at the phone. I went back to the kitchen, a faint frown etching itself between my brows. We ate in a silence that felt heavier than usual, punctuated only by the clinking of forks against ceramic and the faint, tinny sounds of whatever was playing on her phone. She barely touched her food. I remember watching her, a strange sense of unfamiliarity creeping in. It was like she was a stranger performing a familiar routine. The movements a little off, the energy wrong. Then, out of nowhere, she mentioned vacation. Philippines, she said, her voice soft, almost a whisper. I blinked, surprised. Where? The Philippines. Wow. We can always take a week off work. You know, been meaning to get away. A genuine smile broke through my unease. A trip. Maybe this was what she needed. A change of scenery, a break from the routine. I was still stupidly optimistic back then. She didn't answer. Her head was down, her gaze fixed on the table, as if the grain of the wood held some profound secret. The silence stretched, long and uncomfortable. It felt like walking on thin ice. Every breath a careful calculation. I felt a knot of concern tighten in my stomach. What was going on? She'd brought it up. Now she was retreating. This wasn't Sarah. Sarah would have been buzzing with ideas, pulling up photos, talking about beaches and food. Then, just as suddenly as she'd gone quiet, she sprang up, almost knocking her chair over, and said, "I want to go to the Philippines." Her voice was a little too loud, a little too bright. I stayed silent for a whole minute, my mind reeling. The abruptness, the shift in her demeanor. It was like watching a switch flip. It was deeply unsettling. But then, the idea of a trip, of escaping, of recapturing what we had, took hold. I forced a smile. "Okay," I said, a little breathlessly. "Okay, let's do it." She smiled then. A small, cute, almost shy smile. The old Sarah, my Sarah. It melted something cold in my chest. I remembered covering my mouth, a blush rising to my cheeks. I was still completely, hopelessly and stupidly in love with her. That smile, that fleeting glimpse of the woman I knew, became a talisman. For the rest of the month, as I pored over travel sites, booked tickets, bought us new clothes, and saved every spare dollar for souvenirs, that smile was all I saw. It fueled me, made me ignore the growing distance, the increasingly blank looks, the subtle strangeness that had begun to cling to her like a faint scent. The day of the trip arrived. I was up before the sun, the nervous energy of travel thrumming through my veins. The apartment was still, bathed in the pre-dawn gloom. I went to the car, started the engine, letting it warm up in the chill morning air, then headed back inside. Half an hour until we needed to leave for the airport. An hour until boarding. Plenty of time if everything went smoothly, which, in my life, it rarely did. I went into our bedroom, empty. The sheets were still rumpled on her side, but she wasn't there. My stomach clenched. "Sarah?" I called out, my voice tight. Silence. I walked to the bathroom door, a familiar dread beginning to coil. "You in there?" "Yes." Her voice muffled but clear. I exhaled, a ragged sound. "Okay, fine, just a last-minute bathroom trip. Nothing to worry about." Only when, as the minutes ticked by, it became something to worry about. 5 minutes passed. 10, 15, the clock on the wall, a cheap digital thing that mocked my analog watch, glared at me. 25 minutes until we had to leave. We were going to miss the flight. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at my skin. I started to pace, hands running through my hair, a low moan escaping my lips. My chest tightened, the familiar vice of anxiety squeezing the air from my lungs. I imagined the wasted money, the lost vacation, the frustration building to an unbearable peak. I walked back to the bathroom door, knuckles white as I rapped on it, trying to keep my voice even. Calm. "Sarah, please, we have to go. We're going to miss the flight. Please hurry." The door opened. She stepped out, fully dressed, but her expression was wrong. Her brow was furrowed, a faint frown playing on her lips, as if Yash were the one inconveniencing her. My jaw tightened. The blood, money, and time I'd invested, the hope I'd clung to, flared into a hot, furious anger. My reluctant conscience was buried under a pile of righteous indignation. "Are you serious?" I snapped, my voice cracking. "What the hell? Why aren't you ready? I spent so much money on this trip. This vacation you wanted. Get in the car. I don't give a damn if you're not ready. We're leaving. Now." Her eyes, those beautiful green eyes I adored, narrowed. Then, slowly, deliberately, she rolled them at me. My anger, already scalding, turned molten. "Did you just roll your eyes? At me? After everything? I spent over $1,000 on this. Sarah, $1,000! Do you have any idea how much I scraped and saved? How much I looked forward to this trip for you? Get in the goddamn car. Now!" "I don't want to go," she mumbled, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. I scoffed, a short, sharp sound of disbelief. "You're joking, no, right? This is some kind of sick joke?" She just stared at me, her expression hardening into something cold, something I didn't recognize. My anger, irrational and ugly, was still burning. I knew it. I knew I was being a monumental jerk. I had never, not once, yelled at her like this in our entire relationship. But the thought of all that money, all that hope, all that effort, vanishing because she didn't want to go, was more than I could bear. My internal monologue, usually so cynical, was screaming with self-recrimination even as the words flew out. You're being an ass, Leo, a complete, total ass. We made it to the airport with 5 minutes to spare, a frantic, breathless dash through the echoing terminal. I mumbled an apology, my pride still stinging, her face still set in that unfamiliar frown. The flight was a blur of cramped seats and tense silence. The vacation itself was normal, blandly, terrifyingly normal. Like a stage play where the actors were slightly off kilter, their lines delivered without conviction. We ate, we swam, we visited tourist traps. We even managed a few strange smiles for photos. It was like a dream, hazy and forgettable. And by the time we were back home, the airport incident, the strange quiet, the eye roll, it had all faded into the background, dismissed as pre-travel jitters and an overdue argument. Nothing to worry about, I told myself. A blip, a minor tremor. I was wrong. Months later, the dream started, not nightmares. At first, just dreams. Persistent, recurring. I couldn't remember the details when I woke up. Only the heavy, oppressive feeling, the faint chill that clung to my skin, and the overwhelming knowledge that I'd been dreaming of. Her. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, heart hammering, and turn to look at Sarah, curled beside me, soft and warm and seemingly oblivious. And then, seeing her there, safe and comfortable, I'd drift back to sleep, dismissing the dreams as stress or bad pizza. Then, one morning, I woke up, and the dream wasn't a hazy memory. It was vivid, terrifyingly so. In the dream, she was running around me, laughing, like a little kid, the old Sarah, full of energy and mischief. I was smiling, laughing too, basking in her uncomplicated joy. And then, she stumbled, not a graceful fall, but a sickening collapse. Her laughter morphed into a choked sob, tears streaming down her face, and her eyes, her beautiful green eyes. They weren't green anymore. They turned red, a startling, arterial red, then faded to a sickly, milky white, like the eyes of something dead or something unborn. Then, she vomited, a thick, viscous stream of blood, dark as crude oil, staining the pristine white floor of the dreamscape. The metallic smell, even in the dream, was sickeningly real. I woke with a jolt, gasping, the taste of bile in my mouth, the lingering scent of copper in my nostrils. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of pure adrenaline. My body was slick with cold sweat, the sheets tangled around my legs. I rolled over. The image of those eyes burned into my retina. Red, pale, dead. I looked at Sarah, lying beside me, still asleep. But the memory of the dream, the horrifying transformation, made my breath catch. Her eyes were closed, thank God. But what if my anxiety, a beast I'd learned to keep caged, was clawing its way out? I reached out a trembling hand, hesitated, then gripped her shoulder. My knuckles were white. "Sarah," I whispered, shaking her gently. "Sarah, wake up." No response. The panic spiked, a hot, searing wave washing over me. "Sarah," I cried, shaking her harder, tears stinging my own eyes. My voice was a frantic, desperate plea. Her eyes fluttered open. Green, still green, my beautiful Sarah. Relief, sudden and overwhelming, crashed over me, pulling the air from my lungs. The adrenaline, which had been pumping through me like a fire hose, suddenly drained away, leaving me weak and trembling. I broke down, sobbing, clinging to her, burying my face in her shoulder. "Oh, God, Sarah," I choked out, tears soaking her pajama top. "I had such a terrible dream. You were..." I couldn't even finish the sentence. She didn't try to reassure me, didn't say, "It's just a dream, baby." She just looked at me, her green eyes unnervingly steady, and said, in a soft, flat voice, "You saw what you weren't meant to see." The word, so calm, so devoid of comfort, hung in the air like a cold mist. My remaining adrenaline had come and gone too fast, leaving me utterly spent. I was too tired to even process it, too tired to argue, too tired to question. I just laid my head back down, pulled her closer, and cried a bit more, the dream still a vivid, horrifying painting behind my eyelids, before finally, mercifully, falling back into a troubled sleep. When I woke again, the first thing I registered was a faint, metallic smell, like old coins or a butcher shop. My eyes, still gritty from sleep and tears, opened slowly. The morning light was filtering through the blinds, casting stripes across the room. And there, on the side of the bed Sarah always slept on, was a dark, viscous puddle. My sleep-addled brain, ever eager for the mundane, immediately supplied an explanation. "Oh, period. Just bled through." It was gross, but normal. Nothing to panic about. Then, I wiped my eyes, clearing the last vestiges of sleep, and focused. The puddle wasn't small. It was a dark, almost black mass, sprawling across the sheet, soaking into the mattress. It was the size of a fat cat, curled up. My breath caught. My stomach lurched. This wasn't normal. This was too much. Far too much. The metallic smell intensified, making my nostrils flare. It was blood. Thick, dark, arterial blood. A rising tide of panic, icy and relentless, surged through me. My breathing hitched, shallow and quick, bordering on hyperventilation. I scrambled out of bed, my feet hitting the cold floor, the horror of the sight momentarily paralyzing me. "Sarah?" I whispered, my voice hoarse. My eyes darted around the room, empty. I grabbed my phone, fingers fumbling, and started to dial 911, my heart a frantic hummingbird in my chest. No. Wait. What am I going to tell them? My wife bled out in her sleep? That's insane. And where is she? I crept out of the bedroom, phone clutched in my trembling hand, the emergency number half dialed. The air in the hallway felt heavy, thick with an unseen presence. Every shadow seemed to deepen. Every mundane object seemed to twist into something sinister. I found her in the living room, or at what I thought was her. She was on the floor, on all fours. Her back was arched at an unnatural angle, spine twisted, limbs crooked and bent like broken branches. Her head was down, obscured by a curtain of tangled hair. A faint, wet sound, like something chewing on gristle, filled the silence. My blood ran cold. The phone slipped from my grasp, clattering to the hardwood floor. Forgotten. "Sarah," I whimpered, a raw, terrified sound. She lifted her head slowly. Her eyes were still green, but wide, unfocused, and streaming with tears. Not tears of sadness, but of effort, of strain. Her jaw was slack, mouth slightly agape, and I could see something dark and wet on her teeth, glistening in the faint light. A primal shriek tore from my throat, a sound of pure, unadulterated horror. I had one last, desperate gasp of air before my knees buckled, and I collapsed onto the floor, scrambling backward, hands clamped over my mouth, trying to stifle the whimpers, the terror, the bile rising in my throat. She looked at me, those tear-filled, green eyes, and then, with a horrifying, wet grunt, she pounced, The world exploded into a blur of motion, a flurry of limbs and a sickening, animalistic growl. I reacted on pure instinct, a survival mechanism honed by years of running from things I didn't understand. I threw myself backward, scrambling to my feet, my legs burning with a sudden surge of adrenaline. I bolted towards the bathroom, the only room with a lock, the only place I could think of. I can't recall the specifics of that desperate sprint, only the searing pain in my lungs, the frantic pounding of my heart against my ribs, and the terrifying knowledge that something was right behind me, something that wanted to tear me apart. I slammed the bathroom door shut behind me, the cheap wood rattling in its frame, and fumbled for the lock. The click, when it finally engaged, was the sweetest sound I'd ever heard. I leaned against the door, gasping, body trembling uncontrollably, the cold ceramic of the tiles seeping into my skin. My breath hitched, ragged and shallow. My eyes darted to the mirror. My reflection was a wild-eyed stranger, hair disheveled, face pale and streaked with sweat and tears. I barely recognized myself. Outside the door, the banging started. Not just a simple knock, but a heavy, deliberate thud, as if something substantial was throwing itself against the wood. The sounds were punctuated by a wet, guttural scraping, a tearing sound. And then, the worst of it, her voice. "I love you," it rasped, thick with a liquid gurgle. But it wasn't Sarah's voice. Not really. It was Sarah's voice. Yes, but distorted, stretched, warped into something monstrous, something beyond human. The words were a mockery, a chilling parody of affection, laced with something hungry and predatory. "I love you." Each syllable was a fresh blade twisting in my gut. My hand was shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. I finally managed to connect to 911. "Help me," I croaked, my voice barely a whisper, thick with terror. My wife." I couldn't form the words. What was I supposed to say? My wife turned into a monster and is trying to kill me? They locked me up. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the noises stopped, the banging ceased, the wet scraping faded, the distorted whisper died. An eerie, profound silence descended, broken only by the frantic hammering of my own heart against my ribs, and a sound, a quiet, steady drip, drip, drip. Blood. I didn't need to see it to know. I could feel it, an oppressive weight in the air, a metallic tang on my tongue. And then, a new sound, a knock, from the front door. Loud, authoritative. The police, finally. Relief, pure and unadulterated, washed over me, so potent it almost made me weak. But the memory of what was outside the bathroom door, of the silence, of the dripping, was a cold counterpoint. No way in hell was I going out that door. Not yet. Not until I knew it was safe. Lucky for me, our bathroom had a small, frosted window. I fumbled with the latch, forcing it open. The cool morning air, a welcome shock to my fevered skin. I stuck my head out, ignoring the chill. "Over here," I yelled, my voice hoarse from disuse. "In the bathroom, over here." Soon, I heard the heavy boots inside the apartment, the murmur of male voices, a cautious knock on the bathroom door. "Police, are you all right in there, sir?" "Yes, just be careful. Please." My voice trembled, betraying the fragile calm I was trying to maintain. The door burst open. Two officer kind of faces grim, guns drawn, scanned the small room. Their eyes widened as they took in my disheveled state, the fear etched onto my face. One of them, a burly man with kind eyes, holstered his weapon and took my arm gently. "All right, sir, let's get you out of here." As they escorted me out, the scene hit me like a physical blow. The walls, they were covered, not just splattered, but coated in thick, dark blood. Streaks and smears marred the once clean surfaces, like some abstract, horrifying art piece. My gaze fell to the hallway floor, a long, dark trail, a macabre breadcrumb path, led from the living room to the bathroom door. And then I looked down at myself. My jeans, my legs, they were soaked and cut, deep, jagged slashes, as if something had clawed at me, torn at my flesh. My brain, blessedly, had blocked out the pain, the physical assault. But now, as I registered the sight, an immense, bone-shattering pain erupted. It was like 1,000 tiny needles piercing my flesh, followed by a dull, throbbing ache that consumed my entire body. My legs buckled. I barely heard the officer's exclamation as I collapsed, darkness beginning to creep in at the edges of my vision. The hospital was a blur of fluorescent lights, sterile smells, and hushed voices. Nurses, doctors, questions I couldn't answer. They stitched my wounds, ran tests, gave me IVs. They called my parents, my family, people I hadn't seen in years, people who had always kept a polite distance. Ever since, my whole family, it turned out, had disowned me. They wanted nothing to do with it. With me, mental breakdown, I heard one of the nurses whisper. Grief-induced psychosis. They didn't understand. They couldn't. Not one person I thought even remotely cared showed up. I was alone. Utterly, completely, terrifyingly alone. It wasn't surprising, just confirming. Confirmed what I already suspected. The world was a lonely, dangerous place, and I was on my own. It just reinforced the notion that I was fundamentally an anomaly. A magnet for the kind of horrors most people could just dismiss as urban legends or mental illness. Once I recovered enough to stand, enough to pull on clothes that felt too big for my newly gone frame, I got my meager belongings from what was left of our apartment. The place was a biohazard, a scene out of a horror movie. My worn leather jacket, miraculously unsullied, was the only thing that felt familiar, a comforting weight on my shoulders. My go bag was still by the door, packed and ready, as always. A premonition, perhaps. I left the country. The U.S. felt too small, too filled with ghosts. Europe, somewhere far. I picked the UK because it was the first place that came to mind. A gray, damp island, a place where anonymity was a virtue. The next 6 months were a fog of grief, paranoia, and a creeping, insidious madness. Every shadow seemed to shift. Every unexpected sound made me jump. I'd wake up in cold sweats, convinced Sarah was there, or what she'd become. My old analog wristwatch, a grounding presence, became a constant fidget toy, my thumb rubbing the worn metal as if to erase the memories. I wandered the streets, a ghost among the living, haunted by the memory of her sweet, kind presence, the way she used to laugh, the gentle touch of her hand. I kept replaying that morning, the fight, my stubbornness, my anger. Could I have saved her? If I hadn't forced her on that trip, would she still be my Sarah? The guilt was a constant companion, a heavy cloak I couldn't shed. After about half a year, the loneliness and the questions became unbearable. I needed answers. I couldn't just live with this. I went online, risking exposure, and started searching. Wife changed. Bizarre transformation. Blood sickness. I sifted through conspiracy theories, medical journals, and obscure forums. Days blurred into nights. Then, I found it. A mention, buried deep in a thread about parasitic entities and psychological manipulation. The Nerovirus. I reached out to the person who'd mentioned it. They were strange, cautious, but they talked. And what they told me, what I read, twisted the knife of guilt deeper into my gut. The Nerovirus, it was, they explained, a parasitic entity, not a biological virus, not in the traditional sense. It operated on a psychological level first. It would whisper to you, A small, insistent voice in your head, urging you to travel to a specific place, always out of your home country. It would trick you into believing it was a sign, a premonition of good fortune, a necessary pilgrimage. The virus's home was in a different environment, a place where its influence was strongest. Once you were there, once your body was adapting to a new climate, new air, new pathogens, the virus took advantage. It began its slow, insidious takeover. Physical changes, behavioral shifts, a complete loss of self. The host became a puppet, their body a vehicle for the entity's will. Some people, the lucky few, could resist. They'd feel the urge, the whispers, but they'd realize, even at the last minute, that it was a trick. They'd fight the urge to travel, they'd stay home, they'd survive. My blood ran cold. The Philippines trip, her idea, my stubborn refusal to back down, my anger, my frustration, my selfish desire not to lose money. I had forced her to go. I had pushed her into the gaping maw of that thing. I was the one who had condemned her. "I don't want to go," she had said. The words so flat, so devoid of emotion. She was resisting, even then. My Sarah, fighting the thing in her head. And I had screamed at her. I had forced her. Why didn't she tell me? Why didn't she explain? But then, the virus probably wouldn't let her. It was subtle, insidious, and my reaction, my outburst. Maybe it had scared her into silence. She had suffered because of me. My fatal flaw, my reluctant conscience, was now a gaping, bleeding wound. Every day since, the guilt has been a heavy stone in my gut, a constant, crushing reminder of my failure. It's been about a year since it happened. A year of running, a year of looking over my shoulder, a year of the world becoming a bleaker, more dangerous place. I feel sorry. Sorry for Sarah. Sorry for myself. Sorry for the ghost of the man I used to be. And now, I'm just Leo, the weary wanderer, the haunted everyman, always moving, always looking, always ready to run, because some things you realize you can never outrun. You just keep adding new layers to the trauma.